Great. Hello, everybody joining us. We're so excited to have everybody here. It's a very special Seasons of Success today. This is actually a full package, if you will, of a topic that's very near and dear to all of our hearts. We're going to be talking about money. So we are very excited. I'm Amanda. If you haven't had a chance to meet me, I'm with the Founders Fund team and Tease, and I will be your host for the day. If you need anything throughout these sessions, feel free to let me know in the chat box. We also have Allie from our Founders Fund team. You'll be able to identify us because it says Founders Fund on the end of our names there. And for those of you joining today for your first ever Founders Fund event, welcome. Here's a little bit about what we do and why we do it. We are a virtual community of diverse women founders from across the globe. We provide barrier-free funding, free education, resources, and events, as well as one-on-one mentoring. At Founders Fund, we believe that our work supporting women in business is vitally important to the future economic success and equality of everybody, but especially now in a post-pandemic economy, we're seeing it as critical, which is why we're so pleased to offer programming like this completely free of cost. Thanks in a big part to our partners over at BDC. And you will notice a couple folks from BDC joining us for sessions today. So please always give them a nice warm welcome when you see them. You can show some gratitude for your panelists and guest speakers today by sharing a quote or tip from each session on Instagram, making sure to tag BDC and Founders Fund, which will enter you to win gift cards from EVO Beauty, Tease, and Bathorium. And we're going to drop all of that info into the chat box so you don't forget it. And before we get into it, we have a couple of quick housekeeping rules. Our team is going to link a document in the chat box that shows you how to change your screen name. We encourage you to include your pronouns as well as pronunciation of your name. It will also show you how to change your panel view and also where to find closed captioning and other accessibility options. Also, we love questions. We feel like this is the type of event and topic that's going to have a lot of questions because money is quite unique and individual to the person. If you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat box. Allie or I will jump into the sessions and ask those questions kind of as they come up and as the opportunity allows. And lastly, before we get to the Money Mindset panel, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge and give gratitude to the land and people that protect the place that I call home. I know many of us call home Canada. I was born and raised in what is now referred to as Southern Ontario, land that has been cared for and inhabited by many nations, included the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. If you would like to know about the people and land of your current home, we recommend the app Whose Land, which we are going to link in the chat box. It's funny, I get emotional every time I do my land acknowledgement, and I was telling that to Allie right before he joined. I was like, I do this land acknowledgement on every event that I host, and every time I just like can't deliver it without getting like a little bit in my feelings about it. Our team actually developed these land acknowledgements to be personal. We felt like it was important for us to develop land acknowledgements that were more than just acknowledgements that truly meant something to us. So everybody on the Founders Fund team has one of these, including Vivian Kay, actually, because Vivian is part of our extended team. And it was a really beautiful practice. If anybody's interested in developing their own land acknowledgement, we can share a little bit about the process and Indigenous guided resources that we used to help develop ours. But as you can see, it goes deep. So I recommend it, especially if you're hosting events and speaking publicly. Okay. On to the very fun stuff. I am very excited to introduce our first session of the day, our Money Mindset panel, hosted by the always incredible Brooke Gordon of BDC. Brooke is a regional manager for BDC's client diversity strategy, where she connects business owners with people and programs to grow and scale their business. Brooke is committed to ensuring entrepreneurs thrive through every step of their business journey, with the help of dedicated partner organizations across the ecosystem. She is absolutely incredible. We are so happy to have her here today. Brooke, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm so happy to be here today. So I am introducing an amazing all-star lineup today to join me on the Money Mindset session. I'm going to start off with Vivian Kaye. She's the founder and CEO of Kinky Curly Yaki, a premium textured hair extension brand for Black women, and she bootstrapped to over $6 million in revenue as an immigrant, college dropout, and single mom. She's a self-proclaimed Gary V meets Oprah remix. Vivian is also a business and empowerment expert, as well as a TV, radio, and podcast personality. Through her magnetic energy, Vivian empowers, uplifts, and educates her audience into taking action. I'm also joined today by Brandy Lifeso. She's the founder and CEO of Evio Beauty Group, an alumni of Sephora Accelerate, and selected as one of Chatelaine Magazine's Women of the Year in 2018. Brandy is an advocate for domestic violence reform and economic justice. Her company, Evio, has donated more than 510,000 worth of products and funding to nearly 30 shelters and organizations across North America. Now, Brandy spoke at Forbes Under 30's first ever Global Women's Summit in Israel. She's recognized as one of Canada's top 25 women of influence in 2020, and then in 2021 received the Independent Retail Ambassador of the Year award from the Retail Council of Canada. Super excited on a couple of fronts. First, congratulations on the new announcement around Shoppers Drug Mart, and also Brandy's pursuit to build Evio from $15 in a domestic violence shelter to the world's first impact-led clean beauty giant has been optioned for a feature film anticipated to hit the film festival circuit in 2025. So just a little bit of a wait, but super excited for that one. Joining us also today, Vivian Salmon. She's the co-founder and the chief legal officer of, now, we didn't actually check with this one. Is it Faith or F8?
You got it, Faith.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Faith Inc., where she is responsible for providing advice and support to the senior management team. Vivian has several years of experience working in the financial services industry, most recently at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, where she was responsible for regulatory change management, privacy, and global compliance. Her accreditations are so impressive: Chief Compliance Officer, Partners, Directors, and Senior Officers, and Trader Training, in addition to being President of the Canadian Bar Association and chaired the board, where she was responsible for governance, advocacy, and the financial affairs of the organization. So it was no surprise to me that Vivian was named a top 25 influential lawyer by Canadian Lawyer Magazine in 2020 and top 25 women of influence. And joining our panel today also is Jace Mayer. She's a Métis educator, public speaker, and entrepreneurship coach with a background in STEM and e-commerce education, spanning nonprofit, public, and private sectors. Jace has a unique vantage point on how all businesses and service organizations can create social impact through partnership, co-creation, and inclusive product design. She specializes in working with Indigenous, women, and youth entrepreneurs and accelerator programs. She's a UVic Distinguished Alumni, DMZ Women of the Year, and a director of the Victoria Native Friendship Center, the Indigenous Lift Collective, and is a strategic advisor to the SAGE Initiative and here at the Founders Fund, helping to diversify entrepreneurship and venture capital. And in 2022, so just this year, Jace founded Koya Productions with a mission to mobilize knowledge for social impact creators, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and unheard youth voices while experiencing joy with her daughter every day. Today, this all-star lineup, we are talking about money matters, and I am so excited. So I want to start off our conversation, if it's okay, with a little bit of nostalgia. And Vivian, I'm going to direct this first question to you. Thinking back to the start of your businesses, what was the first job you had, and do you remember how you spent your first paycheck?
First job I had,
First
paycheck. Oh gosh, girl, that was so long ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. Well, I remember lying about my age. So I was maybe 14 at the time and told them I was 16. And it was, I remember it was, I worked at, there's a park near my parents' house. And I worked for the region of Hamilton, like the conservation authority for Hamilton. And I worked at the park, and all I did was walk around picking up garbage. How much did I make? I don't remember, but it seemed like a lot back then.
Vivian, do you remember what your first purchase was?
No. I remember what my first CD was.
Okay, tell me, what was the first CD you bought with all this amazing money you're earning?
I remember the first CD I bought was Shy, If I Ever Fall in Love. So I remember we had a little boom box. Anyways, I bought my first CD, and that was my first CD that I ever bought. So yeah, I remember that.
Amazing, amazing. I'm gonna hold mine off until the end, but it's a great question. I love this one. Is there anyone else who can remember what, thinking back either to the start of your business or way back at the very beginning, first job you ever had, and how did you spend your first paycheck?
I don't mind going next. So my first job that I remember was at Stitches Retail, and my aunt had worked there and helped me get the job there. And I remember about that is that they played the Grease soundtrack like every single day, all day long for like about 7 hours. And then my next job was at Dairy Queen, where I worked there for about 3 years during high school. I had other jobs at Bingaman's, at the Bay and Men's Shoes. I worked in an art gallery, did all sorts of things. The first purchase that I remember was I wanted a pair of jeans. And my mom said that, sure, you can have a pair of jeans, but you have to chip in half the money. So I remember like working really hard because I wanted a pair of jeans so badly. And then my first real job, like after I finished my formal education, was that I bought silk pillowcases because they were good for your hair. So I remember those were the first things that I bought with my money in my first job, and then my first real job after university.
Amazing. I love that story. I get the clothing piece. Mine was a dress with matching little tights, and my grandma gave me a loan for a whopping $40 and no interest-free loan. And I had to do babysitting to pay it back. Brandy or Jace, do either of you have a memory that's come to mind?
I can go next. My first job was at 14, and I worked at ABC Country Restaurant as a hostess. And my sister, who was 15, also worked there. She got me the job, and I was let go pretty quick. I was not very good at the job. And the first thing that I bought was food. I spent my money on food from my first job. Yeah.
Eating your paycheck. I love it. Jace,
Yeah,
how about you?
My entrepreneurship journey started really young. I grew up in a military family, and military people need to deploy quite quickly, and they have responsibility to clean their house, their PMQ. And a neighbor ran out of time and asked me to clean their place for $500. And I was 8, so that was mad money at the time. And it turned into a little hustle for the next few summers. I cleaned houses at like 8, 9, and 10. I think the vacuum weighed more than I did at the time that I dragged around the community. And I didn't spend a cent. I was saving all of my money for university. I didn't think I'd be able to afford to get in. I didn't know scholarships were going to be a guarantee. So I had a little metal money box that I just stashed money in. And then I remember my stepdad having a conversation with me that now that I was a money maker, I would be buying all of my own clothes and shoes. And I really wanted to play basketball that season, and I needed basketball shoes to play. So I bought basketball shoes strategically 2 sizes too big so that they would last me as I continued to grow. And then joke's on me, I'm the same height I was at 8 and my feet never grew anymore. So I had these useless, stupid shoes that cost me way too much money. And I think my relationship and trauma of money might have started in that first purchase. And shoes are still the thing that I want to like take care of myself with when I have a big win. It's like, what shoes am I going to have to reward myself with this milestone because of those stupid basketball shoes in the beginning?
Jace, I feel like you have just set the tone for a good part of our conversation today. Thank you so much with that. I'm gonna ask you to, maybe, if you don't mind, expanding a little bit more on that. Like, you touched a little bit on this conversation with your dad saying, you're the moneymaker now, and here's some of the responsibilities that are gonna go along with that. So, as an example, can you tell us a little bit more about money conversation? Was wealth good or bad? There obviously was a conversation. And did you find that money was more used for control or shared easily?
Yeah, beautiful question, Brooke. I think that there's a real what it was and what it should have been experience in my life. So culturally, as a Métis person, our wealth is measured by our ability to give. So how much can you share? That determines how wealthy you are. And pretty true to most Indigenous communities is the belief system that if you have a lot of money and you haven't shared it, it's actually an indicator of illness. Like it's socially sick to hoard money and not be in community with money and not be supporting more than just yourself with that money. So that, I think, is like true to my being. But I wasn't raised that way. As I said, my stepdad had a very different relationship with money. It was total capitalism and hoarding, and it was an inappropriate relationship. I had too much information about my financial situation in our house. It should have been a conversation he would have been having with my mom. So I saw a lot of financial abuse. Really is my first experience with money. People and everything was like an item, and there was a value that he would associate to his time with people, and what was the return going to be for him. So I saw money as something that you really had to pay attention to, that it was worth more than everything else, including relationships. And it never really sat well with me, but also it was a means to an end in getting out of a situation I didn't want to belong to anymore. So I was also very work focused, and I really wanted to get to go to university. So I hustled. I've had no short of 3 jobs my entire life. This is probably the least amount I've ever worked in starting my own business and not having multiple things at the same time. But I was definitely raised to believe that everything should be monetized. And I'm really trying to unlearn that really unfortunate way of thinking. And like, for instance, right now I'm trying to find a hobby I have no intention of monetizing. So I decided to become a pilot because I never want that job, but I really want to do the thing of flying. And it's going to cost me more money than I'll ever make out of it. So it's like a real monkey puzzle in my brain of how do I undo these things. And the best thing I knew how to do was get a really expensive hobby and get comfortable spending money on myself just for the pleasure of the outcome and not because it was going to have some kind of return on investment in the future. So essentially put my culture back to alignment. We give things away. So just this weekend, we hosted a moose feast. We had a successful moose hunt this summer, and we shared that with 70 different members of our community here at our home, just as a bit of a return to a bit more of a potlatch system where you do share everything you have with your community as often as possible. So that's where I'm at right now. It's a work in progress.
Jace, you uncovered so much conversation there. A few things that really resonated with me. The idea of being able to spend on yourself, for yourself, purely, whether it's reward or for pleasure, both, right? Because I heard you say both. And shoes as a reward, pilots for pleasure. And I also heard in that there's so much influence from parents and those around us, which may or may not be aligned with the values and also the narrative in the community relative in the home. So thank you for honoring us with so much openness in the conversation you just shared. I really appreciate that a lot. Sarah, anyone else who has sparked some thoughts as well around the conversation about money that you had growing up? Vivian, Brandy?
Sure, I can go next.
Thank you.
So I think Jace as well, My family influenced the way I saw money, but then I learned over time that while your family can influence your values, over time you have to develop what your own values are as well. So in my family, I grew up in a very religious family, and wealth was not considered bad. It was just considered a reward for your hard labor and to give part of it when you could to charity or to help others. My parents were newcomers from Jamaica in the, I guess, late 60s, early 70s. Like a lot of immigrants that were newcomers, my parents' motto was always like, it's not what you earn, but what you save and how you invest and handle your money, because both of my parents, they didn't have this amazing education. So that's why education became important for them to give to their kids, but they still wanted to be successful and to make their way in Canada. And I think when I look back, I felt, don't know for sure, but I'm thinking there was probably a lot of pressure from back home that you would succeed in your new country of origin. I think the other thing, what I thought about is my parents always had a view that it's good to learn how to do things yourself so that you don't have to pay for everything for somebody to do it for you. And a childhood memory of mine is I always remember my mom would check the weekly flyers and then she would circle it and check and buy things on sale. And I remember too, my parents always bought furniture on sale, cars on sale. They paid for pretty much everything in cash. When I was 16, my mom gave me a book by the Jamaican Canadian financial guru. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her, Gail Vaz Oxlade, but she wrote a book at the time. I think she's had many books come out since then, but it was called A Woman of Independent Means. And I remember this book really quite influenced me because it talked a lot about values, how you think about money, and then how you can spend money and how you can invest money. So for me, I started investing at a pretty young age, again shaped by my parents, not what you earn but what you do with it kind of attitude. And then I think generally I just increased my knowledge from there. So I think in the end, I feel that your family influences you, but you have to figure out for yourself what your values about money are in terms of how you share it versus how hoarding, as Jace mentioned. I think that's an important thing to consider, is that it's a resource. And I know in some families it's influenced by power and a lot of things, but I think it's important to have a healthy relationship with money.
Vivian, my spouse and I have a money jar. So absolutely get the reference to Gail Vaz Oxlade. That started in a time when he was a little obsessed with saving, and I was out of work at the time, and it was our going out budget, and it was something that had to be spent, money that was for us. So it had really great reference there for me that resonated. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing the different perspectives, and for sharing so much about your childhood and your parents' experience. Is there anyone else who wanted to share on this topic? Conversation on money growing up.
I can share a bit of a different experience around money growing up. I definitely learned that money.
Oh, Brandy, there you go.
It cut off.
That's okay. I think you're back.
So I definitely learned that people who had money, there was this thought instilled in myself and my siblings that anyone who had money was bad, and that you only became rich through making selfish decisions. And so we were also taught that through education as well. Education was not determined to be a positive thing in our home. I have one sibling who, out of 9, who went to post-secondary education and has a university degree. And we recognized a lot, something that her and I bond over quite a bit, because my financial situation is very different than the rest of my family's now. My entire reality is very different than my upbringing. But same with my sister in a different way in terms of her education. She's actually now going on to get a PhD, and her and I bond over the experience of, she was really looked down upon for getting an education within our family, because it was looked at that it was projected on her that she thought she was better than them because she had an education, and vice versa. once my brand and experience started to become more public, because I really made a conscious choice to not speak about the financial aspect within my family, as well as things started to change. But as things started to get press released and people form their own thoughts and opinions about how they think you're doing financially, I experienced a similar thing that my sister did from an education perspective. Whereas it was determined then that I thought I was better, like there was a projection that I thought I was better because I had money, and also a projection that I made poor, selfish choices. And that is why I am doing better now financially. And so I have had to do a lot of unlearning those kinds of thoughts and habits through a lot of therapy, including hypnotherapy. And this is something that I still do, because having those thoughts actually caused me to reflect receiving. And so it actually limits my ability to make more money, or to even be open to feeling as if I deserve, because I feel like I have to make a choice out of being a good person or making money. So even when I did start making money, I actually spent it very quickly or gave it away very quickly, because I did not want it, because I then felt as if I had my own projections and perceptions of myself, that I was a bad person if I had money in the bank, which I knew wasn't logical, but subconsciously that's how I felt, because of the upbringing relationship that I was taught to exist within financially.
Brandy, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing such a personal story. And I'm seeing in the chat, it's resonating with some people. Education and finances can make you snobby or spoiled. And I think what you're really highlighting also is that mindset around money, both how you were raised and how you perceive it now, in the context of being able to succeed in business. Right? There's, even for me, there's such a fundamental difference in the nuance between personal finance and business finance, and the way we approach them as well. Whether you have debt or you use debt as a tool, whether you are open, you talked about reflecting the receiving of money, which is very different from seeing money as a way for people to express their thanks for the transformation that you've brought into their life, or the joy that they've brought into their life, and they don't have ways of expressing that. This is my own view, but they don't have many ways to express that thanks and gratitude, and money is one of those. And I think back to a mechanic that I had who just kept giving me service, like the little fix here, a little fix there. And finally one day I was like, please charge me for something, because I need you to stay in business. Oh no, it's okay. I know you'll come in for an oil change. I'm like, an oil change is not going to cut it. So absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Sort of leads me to the next question that we were going to bring into. So thank you for sort of circling us around to that idea of that mindset. And so I'll just sort of reiterate that mindset that you were raised with around money and financing, maybe in contrast to the mindset that you carry now. And how has that helped you in your business? Yeah, I'm going to go Vivine and then Vivian for sure.
Sure, I don't mind starting. So one, I think this is a very deep question on a lot of levels. So like I mentioned, for me, I grew up in a religious family, and money was just seen as a reward for hard labor, a reward for being blessed, all that kind of way of thinking. So I never, like I said, thought about it as negative. And I saw people with beautiful homes and things like that, and I never saw it as negative. But I have understood the other experience, and I'm thankful for you sharing that, Brandy, because I know others have expressed to me that they've had that experience as well. So fast forward, I think now I was influenced to think of it as a resource and a tool that what it comes down to is money not in and of itself, but money is a tool that allows you to make choices. So you want to eat at McDonald's, great. You want to take your family to Disney World, great. It was just seen as a tool that allowed you to choose. When you didn't have it, you can't choose. So I guess that's kind of how I grew up and was socialized to think about it. So I do think that influences the way I think now. Do you think it's okay to spend money on yourself? And same thing, spend money in your business, how you think it should be spent. When I was also thinking about, what influences me now, I felt my parents, they had a lot of discipline, I would say, as I mentioned before, being immigrants and newcomers. And so for them, money wasn't seen to show off on it. Again, it was just seen as a tool, and to kind of deny yourself sometimes because I remember sometimes in the supermarket, when my mom had finished paying for all the candies or by the till, I remember, like any kid, you want the candy and stuff. But I remember my mom, there was times she'd be like, no, and like she meant no, like there was no moving around that. So I think in hindsight, I realized it was just building you self-denial. I feel like just because you want something doesn't mean you should have it right away, and just not to buy stuff for stuff's sake. So I think that influences how you, to me, in the business spending, like, do we want it or do we need it? So that's kind of, I think, how, I think about that now as well. So I guess over time, I came to realize that I probably have a saver mindset, again, influenced by my family, which is not necessarily a good thing, because over time I realized that, yes, saving is important, but also spending is important, and having an appropriate spender mindset. So I feel like, like the past, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years, I've focused more on having a spender mindset, like, having money, but also spending on things that are appropriate. Same thing within the business. So I think you can spend strategically for future gain as well. So I think all of this, I realize the way you're socialized with money, your friendships over the years, all of these things shape the way we think about money in our business. But overall, I think it's a journey, really, in terms of coming to the view, like having a healthy relationship. But in the end, I think it's about choices. And I think that's the best way to think about it. Same thing within your business. When you don't have any, it's harder to make choices. It's harder to hire a new employee. It's harder to inject money in the business. Like everything in a way is harder. So, but anyway, that's what I think and my experience. So maybe I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Vivian, do you want to jump straight in?
Yeah, so my experience with money is very similar. It's actually, I guess, maybe what Vivian has gone through and what Brandy's gone through, and it's just I sort of meet in the middle. But like my parents, they came from villages in Ghana and Togo, and so their experience with money hasn't always been. It's you have it, you have to hang on to it, and it was very much they were very, what's that word, risk averse. So they didn't do debt. Like even to this day, they don't really do debt. Like if they've got $50,000 limits on their cards, they don't know why they have it, but the bank keeps giving it to them. And if there's $100 on there, they start freaking out and they need to pay it down as soon as possible. So that's been my sort of mindset growing up. But of course, as I got into business, at first I started out with that. And even when I built my business, it was, I started literally from a rubber, like I didn't take on any debt to start the business. I literally bought one and would take that, sell it, and then use that profit to buy two. And that's how I slowly grew my business. And it wasn't until, I was like 6 years into the business, and that's when I took on debt, because I realized that it took money to make a lot more money. And especially with the way my business was growing, I didn't have, $100,000 in the bank. So then I needed to get that debt in order to grow my business to the next level. And so that was a really hard choice for me to make. So then I started to employ like these little, like Brandy mentioned, she does hypnotherapy. I just started to do my own little version of hypnotherapy, which was just having money, it's fake, but stacks of fake money around. So I got more comfortable with large amounts of money. So for me, it wasn't necessarily, I'm manifesting $1 million. It was, no, I'm feeling more comfortable with having larger amounts of money in my possession. And so it really helped me to grow into a 6-figure business, right? To realize, okay, you can't grow a 6-figure into a 7-figure business. So I started to realize I couldn't build, $1 million business if I kept doing it myself. So then what do I have to do? I have to hire people. In order to hire people, I need to spend money. And so then it took a minute for me to get there, but I did finally get there. And when I did, oh my goodness, my business exploded. Right. And so really I had to move from having a scarcity mindset about money into a more abundant a mindset about money. And even then I took that and I also applied it to my life. Right. So, and here, I'm not here to say, you guys have to spend money like be balling out of control. No, I very much live within my means. I live in Hamilton. I bought my house, for under $200,000. But I sacrificed in order to live within my means so I could do bigger things. Right. So I sacrificed, these material things so that I could live a better life and provide for my son. And also I'm a single mother. So I even have even more burden. So I don't have a second income to rely on. And as an entrepreneur, that's freaking scary. So I had to release the scarcity mindset in order for me to claim abundance in my life.
Vivian, I love you for sharing that. It so resonates with me. And I think, Brandy, you said it too, around learning to receive. That was really difficult. Money was scarce, and what was there had a purpose, so it couldn't be spent. It was definitely an unhealthy relationship with money. So receiving money, naming my worth, saying what, and especially when you're in the space of like providing services, it's your time, your energy, your wisdom that you're selling, or your brand and your social network. It can be really uncomfortable. And in all of the work that I've done with Indigenous entrepreneurs, it's the number one thing we spend time on is know your worth, add tax. And mostly the coaching I do, I really shouldn't get paid for it, because I pretty much just tell people to add zeros to the end of their prices, and then get prepared to do it again next season. But it's really important. And one of the things that really helped me break through was to think about money as medicine. So that is not a concept that's mine. It's Edgar Villanueva's, and I'll share it in the chat here. There's a really beautiful guided journal that comes with it. It's really about decolonizing our understanding of money, which is completely a scarcity mindset. And then when you layer on gender on that, us women were never supposed to be in control of the money once capitalism came in, and yet that's opposite to how things have been in Indigenous communities. It's always the women that make those kinds of decisions. And so I'm really cognizant of how we talk about money in front of our children, because that's our opportunity to break this wealth gap for our young girls. And that's really critical for me as I launch my business, to really bring my daughter through the process with me. Because we teach our girls to manage their spending, and we teach our boys to manage their investments. So yeah, saving money under your mattress has value, but investing it into an investment has much more value. And now with the rise of social impact opportunities to invest your money, you really can put your money towards a world that feels better and creates a better future for our people. And I think that's a really powerful thing that every one of us could walk away seeing ourselves as an investor, even if you're not investing, with like huge chunks of capital. Every day we get a choice to how we spend our money. So $1 is one vote towards, do you want a world with more McDonald's in it, or do you want a world with more Vivian Kaye in it? Where are you going to spend your money is going to produce the world that we want. So I think for all of us, when we think about how we think about our relationship to money in our business, is like, who are the young people that are witnessing that? If we can't receive money in a good way, they're not going to receive money in a good way. So I really think it's important for us to be really mindful of our language in front of young people, because the cycle breaking opportunity is so profound. So just as an example, a small story, I bought my first house on my own last year, knowing full well that I was going to launch my business and diversify my assets, and hope that the short-term gain of flipping a house would help with the long-term investment in my own business. I really want to bootstrap it. It's a cultural principle to not ask for help or be dependent on anyone. It's different than being afraid of debt or taking on investment. It's just like a thing I'm trying to do. But the purchase of the house, I did with my daughter. She also came, she took her $6.75 life savings and was written into the mortgage, and had her first return on investment this year. And so to your point, Vivian, and we really wanted her to see that investing is more important than saving, and have a really profound relationship to receive a lot of money. So a little bit of parent magic. I purchased $2,001 US bills, because her curiosity was, if I invest this money, will I get paper money back? And if I get paper money, will there be so much that I might need an elastic around it? And their lawyer was quick to say, Charlie Rose, I think if you invest this money today in this market, not only will you have money come back to you with an elastic around it, you might need a suitcase to carry it out of here. So I bought $2,001 US bills so we could stack up money and present it to her when she saw that return on investment. And now she's challenged to understand how she's going to take that money and move it into our community and think of it like medicine. So she's choosing right now whether or not she wants to help reinvigorate the buffalo population, which my people were dependent on historically, and or save the trees. So I just think the more experiences we can create for our little people to really actively change their relationship with money is such a beautiful way that we can act as leaders and matriarchs in the businesses that we're running. And that intergenerational thing, you know, they're going to raise their kids with a different thing. So it's a really, really strong investment in how we use our time and how we use our words and language around money in front of our young people. So just want to share.
Jace, there is so much joy in what you just shared, and the chat is just like exploding at the moment. And the thing that I keep hearing is choice. Choice, because money is for me, it has sort of a, you know, I often hear water themes around money, if the idea of flowing, right, and having this fluidity to it, but also choice, that it is also a tool, and we think of tools as being something hard and tangible. And so whether that choice, and I think Vivian, you gave some great examples. Are you looking to go to McDonald's? Are you looking to go to Disney? Are you looking to invest in Buffalo? Or are you looking to invest in trees? Are you looking to put some money into an investment? In this particular case that you gave was real estate. There's many other forms. And then what type of potential return could that have? But also separating that economic return from the social element, that you don't have to assign an economic value to social value. And so there's so many beautiful pieces that I'm hearing in this. I want to pivot, if that's okay, to sort of where we're going, but also the idea of borrowing, because we've heard this a little bit. Vivian, you talked about how you sold one and you made enough profit to buy two, but 6 years later was when you were like, no, I need to now hang into this tool. And then as soon as you did, it exploded, right? And so what I'm also hearing is that time plays such a huge role in that tool, because we can save over time, or we can leverage and be able to borrow, use the tool to get us, buy us the time, be able to take the opportunity that is in front of us with the community that has been presented to us, and then be able to have enough profit to instead pay back rather than save forward. And it's such a different and interesting mind frame. So my question, again, this is a double-ended question for this one. And so, you know, I'm gonna, you know, give you, please let me know what resonates both with you. But my first thought is, have you ever borrowed from friends or family or partners, and how did that work out? Or from the flip side, alternatively, have you ever loaned money to friends or family or partners, and what was the result? Is there anyone who's comfortable to jump in on this one? Brandy, I'm seeing you reach for the mute.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on this one. I also wanted to add too, because something that we haven't touched on, Jace had just mentioned it briefly in terms of capital raised from investors as well. And that's sometimes, I think that raising capital is actually a beautiful thing, especially as a woman, because women are still only receiving 2% of venture capitalist funding. And I think that moving those funds, and I saw also in the chat that it's really about energy. And I think that part of owning that power as a female business or entrepreneur, female business owner, is being able to reposition that money. And one of my favorite things is actually raising capital from, to be really kind of forward in the way that I express it, raising capital from old rich white men and putting it to better use and repositioning that power. I actually like get a really big thrill out of that, because it allows me to be able to, similar to what Vivian said, instead of raising debt, I'm able to reposition those funds to be able to grow faster and employ more incredible women, and also to be able to put more of that money out into our community, to be able to invest into our communities. And particularly something that's really important and passionate to me is reinvesting into domestic violence reform and funding into shelters and policy change and things like that as well. And so and also to mention on that too, sometimes debt is not accessible. Debt can be a very, very hard thing to access, especially as a entrepreneur, if you don't have any assets against it. So depending where your starting point is, if you don't have somebody to co-sign on a loan, if you have really bad credit because of circumstances that may have been out of your control, debt may not be an option for you. You may not have access to it. And so you may have to give away equity. You may have to raise funds. And that is totally okay. So I wanted to touch on that too, because sometimes debt is not an option, and sometimes debt is a privilege. So yeah, so that, and then leaning into the question more so in terms of the loaning. So I have raised capital through venture capitalists as well as through angel investors. So they're looking for a return on that. That is not from a loan perspective, but I have also borrowed money, and I have also loaned money. So when I loan money, I loan it from the perspective that I'm never going to get this back. And I think that is the healthiest way to do it, because you may never get it back. I loan money as if I'm making an investment. So if it is somebody whom, you know, I really feel is going to make good with this money and move this money as energy into a better space within our communities and help themselves and others thrive with this money that they asked to be loaned to them, whether it means, you know, that they need to pay their rent, and by loaning them this money, it's going to give them the mental capacity to have their rent paid so they can sleep at night, so they can work harder at their job. I'm happy to do that and just expect to never receive it back. And in fact, I have loaned quite a bit of money, and when Christmas rolls around, just said, you know what, your Christmas gift is to wipe that clear. Just keep it. And so, but on the flip side of that, I have also borrowed money, and sometimes it has worked out great and sometimes it has not. Particularly in some experiences where it has not, has been that an example of this was when I was first starting my business. I had no access to debt, I had no money, and I got a huge PO. And so this purchase order was like $210,000, and I had to place a deposit with the manufacturer. The deposit with the manufacturer was like $20,000. I did not have $20,000. I was barely covering rent. Like, I was eating mac and cheese. But my friend she inherited some money, and she had just bought a house. She just sold her house, and her and I were temporarily living together while she was kind of figuring out her next move, and she had access to these funds. So she loaned me those funds to be able to put down on the deposit, which I was so grateful for, and still am to this day. I then paid her back when the PO went through, everything went through, paid her back. And we also went to a trip to Vegas. We were in our mid-20s. We went to Vegas to celebrate this, and all was good. But then when I started to do really well, and it was more public, there was definitely some resentment. And that is something that I have recognized as well, is that often your success can be a reflection for those that maybe have been scared at that point in their life to take those leaps. And so if they have participated, even just sometimes in giving you support or patting you on the back or sitting with you when you've cried, but that reflection sometimes forces people to take a look at, hey, why am I not celebrating the wins of the goals that I set out for myself yet? And that can sometimes cause some friction if they've participated in the form of a loan or anything else within that relationship. So I definitely have experienced that. And then on the flip side of that, in a more positive way, when I got married earlier this year, so now the finances within being married is a little bit different. But when he was my boyfriend, he also has a very different relationship with money. He is a first generation immigrant from India. And he also learned you save all that money, and you saved money is safety, and you secure this, and then you buy a house, and then you or it's for a rainy day. COVID hit and things got really, really challenging. I was continuing to pay commercial lease, like real estate, and like it tanked for the first 6 months. Things got really challenging, and I needed to borrow money from him. And I'm talking like he had a lot of rainy day funds. He also, within his culture, he was taught, save money, you live at home, you go to university. He lived at home till we lived together. He had a little stint in between of like 6 months where he lived with a roommate. So he lived at home making like 6 figures, living at home, not paying rent, not paying food, staying at home. And so he had like hundreds of thousands of dollars saved. And I was like, it's a rainy day. We need to spend the rainy day fund. We live together now. This is what we need to do. And also, he was benefiting off of a lot of the successes when things were going really well. And also, we were about to get married. This is another topic of finance. We were about to get married, and deal breaker in us getting married was a prenup. That was something culturally he was not comfortable with. So I said, if that is the case, then when times are tough, we're both in this, and when times are good, we're both in this. So I did borrow money from him, and that also did cause a lot of challenges in our relationship for about 6 months until it all turned around. Everything that I said I predicted, which put a lot of pressure on me because none of us have crystal balls in our business. What I was hoping would happen with the money that we put in from his savings, what I was hoping to happen, I didn't know if it would for sure or not. I could just give best efforts. And so, I mean, if it didn't work out, that may have been the end of our relationship. But it did work out. And now, he has his own business and such as well. And now he's coming to me for advice on how he can change his money mindset to take these calculated risks instead of having that scarcity mindset where he's saving all of the money. So yeah, it really depends. It can work and not work.
Brandy, thank you for honoring us by sharing such personal insight into your family life. I know I shared a little bit more about that rainy day fund that my spouse was leaning into, and it really is an important dynamic, the relationship with family as youth, and then also that relationship with family as adults as well, and family being a much sort of extended family in whatever context that means. You gave a couple of really good hints when we were chatting. And so in our last few minutes together, I want to tip into what advice would each of you give to the entrepreneurs on the call today who are navigating either a tricky relationship around money or just in general? Your final tip, advice that you would give to other entrepreneurs around money situations or tricky relationships in the context of money. Vivian, I see you come off mute.
Yeah, so it really is true that you've got to spend money to make money. And now I'm not saying spend willy-nilly. I'm not saying blowing money fast and balling out of control. That's not what I'm talking about. But you have to think of spending money as investing in yourself and in your business. Because the only way you're going to grow or scale a business is if you make those investments. But if you want to stay small and you're happy with, the little hobby thing that kind of makes money, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's no need to monetize every single thing you do. So that's okay too. So I would say my one piece of advice is you do have to spend money to make money. But then, like Jay said, add some zeros. if, sometimes you have to make fear your friend instead of making it your enemy. So sometimes, yes, it's scary to add a zero or to increase your prices, but you know what? You got to do what you got to do. You don't see these gas stations hesitating. Right? You don't see all these, billion-dollar corporations hesitating and wondering, oh, well, what will so-and-so think? And not to say that you shouldn't think about what, the little guy thinks, but it is what it is. And, there's a reason why the rich get richer. Just don't be a jerk about it.
Oh, lovely parting words. I love that. Thank you, Vivian, for that. That is really, really excellent. Vivian, can we pop to you perhaps next to see your thoughts and advice?
Sure. Well, I think it's a nice transition from Vivian, because I was thinking about two things as she was speaking. I'm a lawyer by background. So one of the things I think, and I guess the philosophy of Faith, the company that I have with my husband, is our belief is to bootstrap as much as possible your company, because from the legal brain mindset, it's you're giving away control of your money too. So there's a benefit to that, but there's also a cost. So I think also that it helps the company grow more organically. The pace could be more natural, as well, of taking account what Vivian's saying is too. It's like that double-edged sword, and both are important to expand and scale. I would also say that, on the other side is you can't forget that investors will expect you to make more sales. They're going to want your company to do very well. All that could be amazing, but it could also be very stressful in terms of your work environment. So I think keeping ownership of your company is important to enable you to respect the values that you want to embed in your company and the vision that you want to embed in your company. So I think, it's always very tricky for entrepreneurs to know what the right move is. And I think that's something that you weigh and balance all the time. But I definitely think also tapping into government programs for wage subsidies, that can cover part of your spending. I think all of those are important tools that can help you bootstrap the company, take it to the next level, and hopefully scale in the way Vivian and Brandy have been able to do, which is pretty amazing.
Thank you so much for that. I'm hearing more and more, again, choices and calculated risks. I'm loving that. Jace, can we come over to you? I saw you had popped off mute earlier. Your advice, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. I think first, it's okay to make money doing what you love. Full stop. That you can decide that that's the type of life you want to have, and make it happen and make it real. It's never been more possible than it has been today. So I really encourage you to find your purpose and build a business around it. It's going to help through the highs and the lows. Entrepreneurship can be an eaten space, but if you're doing something that you really feel deeply passionate about in the way that you show up in the world, it'll sustain you. So yeah, finding that purpose first, versus just trying to find a business that will make money or can make money. One that can make an impact, I think, helps in those feast and famine points of view, but also to realize in your startup space that you're probably time rich and money poor. So manage both equally and as one or the other. So when you have the time, use it, and realize that your time is really valuable. And then my last little hack that I can share is, especially as it relates to my public speaking work, is that I've really tried to price myself out of the work. Like, what is the most amount I could charge so that this person is likely to say no? And then they have to come back to me with their next highest offer. And just to find out what that is right up front and when I'm early in my work, and to be pleasantly surprised when people are like, great, Jace, we could do that, or we can't do that, but we can do this. It did mean that I had to accept some no's in the beginning, but then people knew what my value was. And when they did have the budget, they came knocking on my door with no questions asked and no ugly negotiations. So, if sometimes it's hard to imagine that you are deserving, if you actually strive to fail, it might be more comfortable for you. So working towards the no was like a way that I needed to hack my brain in order to get to the yes.
Oh, that is powerful. I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. Yes, Vivian, I saw you come off mute.
Well, I was going to say, let them say no. Like, don't say no to yourself. Let them say no. So yeah.
Yeah. Getting to know is great because it's practicing the objections, it's practicing understanding the needs. So good. Brandy, last thoughts. You opened us into a fabulous conversation here on tips and advice. Is there anything that you wanted to circle back to?
I think just making sure that you're aligning yourself with like-minded people. And again, like a business is a tool for so much more than just making money. And so ensuring that those that you are aligning yourselves with align with those values as well. Vivian had mentioned that she had brought up a point that is often very true, but also often not, that when you take on investors, that you may lose some of that control or that you may lose some of those values. And that does not have to be, it certainly isn't my reality at all. But with that is, I think, the most important that you are aligning yourself with people whom align with the values and the larger picture of the impact that you are looking to make with your business, because the money that your business makes is just a tool to do exactly that in the world. So just align yourself with good people.
Oh, beautiful words to end on. Absolutely. This has been such a joy for me. I want to take just a moment to thank each of you, Vivian, Brandy, Jace, Vivian, who I know had to hop off for another engagement. Amanda, thank you for having me to be here to host today. This conversation was just so packed. It has been such a joy. My heart is so full. I've been keeping an eye on the comments as they came by. So much there. And also, in addition, each one of our, the links to each one of our panelists is in the chat as well, if you want to reconnect with them there. So Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the Money Matters session today.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Sorry, everybody, I'm having some video difficulties. Allie's going to help me out with that in a second, but for now you have my voice. What a great session. And I was chatting with a bunch of people in the chat box about why we lead money-focused events with a lot of emotion and a lot of stories. And that's because truly a dollar isn't just a dollar, it's so much more than that. And we know that we are so conditioned to view money and abundance and the way that we grow our businesses in such a limited way that we really have to start with spiritualism and mindset and all of the other stuff that goes into money, because it's not as easy as just like go out, get a dollar, make a couple more. We know that it's not that simple. So thank you so much for this vulnerable conversation. Just killer as always. This was just fantastic. And I'm very excited to go into our next session for the day. So this is a really exciting session coming up because we have Sheena Brady of Tease and Founders Fund. She's our founder and CEO, as well as Catherine Vanderswan of BDC. And the really interesting thing about this is Catherine is actually Sheena's actual account manager at BDC. And they've been working together for about 5 years. And I know that Sheena has a lot of really interesting stories about the start of Tease, formerly known as Tease Tea, and how much she's grown. And something interesting, Catherine and Sheena didn't hear me say this, but before when we were doing sound check with the Money Mindset panel, I was just reflecting on how much Catherine has really guided and helped our company grow far before my time, far before Allie's time there. And I said, you know, Catherine might be the reason why there is a Tease today. And it might be the reason why Allie and I have such an incredible job and work with such an incredible team. So Catherine, thank you. Sheena, thank you. And I'm going to leave it to you guys, and I'll be here in the background collecting some questions to bring in during the discussion.
Amazing. Thank you. And thanks for bearing with my tech check moments. Catherine, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. Now I feel guilty. I was going to make a crack about my gray hair and Tease Tea, but you guys are so nice to me in the intro.
I mean, it's nothing but the truth. And I'm going to add on and go a little bit off script from what we've kind of prepared today, but I'm going to share through my perspective, our origin story with Tease working with you in BDC. And I'm pretty sure I told you this story, but for those who are watching, the first I'd say the first 500,000 that Tease ever did in revenue, we did that with a $1,000 credit card limit, which might sound impressive on the surface, but behind the curtains was a logistical nightmare. And I remember just pleading with my bank endlessly, like, I need a loan, I need a line of credit. And I wasn't able to get the support that I needed, to the point where they were giving me business cards to other banks, which is wild. And I look back on those days, and there's many factors that contributed to that. And actually the session just right before us kind of covered a lot of it. I had a very different mindset and relationship with money. I never took on debt. I thought I was a good girl for never taking on debt. So therefore, I didn't have a credit history that supported taking on debt. I didn't understand the concept of using debt as a tool, debt as like a benefit. I just always saw it as a bad thing. But yeah, I remember Startup Canada had this huge event here in Ottawa about at that $500,000 mark that I was saying, where I just like hit this endless roadblock. And the VP of some department at BDC, I forget his name, I apologize, but he was a speaker and he was holding mentorship hours. And I thought, okay, I am going to go and find this guy at the end of his talk, and I'm going to chase him down, and I'm going to tell him my story, tell him that like my business is not going to last long-term if I don't get help. And this is my last ditch resort. And so I did exactly that. I chased this person down, sat with him for 10 minutes. It was like speed dating mentorship, kind of event basically. So I gave him my 10-minute pitch, and he said, wow, that sounds awful. And I really like your story, and I think you have a lot of potential. I'm going to send someone to your office. And at the time, just my tiny little dingy Canatech warehouse in an industrial part of Ottawa. And I said, okay, great. And I'm not going to hold my breath, but sure, here's my business card. And then sure enough, you showed up at my door, my actual office, as a real person. And I'm so used to me running around to like, going to the bank and whatever, but to have someone come to my office, sit down with me, that was just like such a breath of fresh air. And that through my perspective is how we first met. And so I'm going to flip the script over to you. I don't even know if you remember that moment, because that was like 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, so what was your impression of me and the business when we first met at that time? That would have been like 2018-ish, I think.
Yeah. Well, first I had a hard time finding it. So I think I was probably running in at the last minute. But I do remember I had to go up this flight of stairs, past all your boxes and everything, and you were kind of doing everything in one space. It was definitely maximum space utilization. So kudos for that. And I believe, was your daughter there that first
My
time?
daughter was there, yeah, and she would have been like 3 months old when we met, like just a baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we went into your office, which was very inviting and comfortable. And I remember sitting on the sofa, and you offered me a tea, and and you talked a bit about the tea. So it was more, we didn't get into the business right away. We got into the tea and you being a tea sommelier, and kind of your why, as opposed to what you were looking for. So I found it very open and inviting. And I met your husband that day too.
Yes.
Because everybody was there, the whole family.
It was truly a family-run business. Like I said, my 3-month-old, we had the pack and play there, the Jolly Jumper. She took nap time there. My husband was packing orders. I was just trying to run everything operationally. So yeah, that was a very, very special time when we met. And I love that you touched on the fact that we really didn't lean into the business hard right away. You really wanted to know more about the business and my why. And again, from my memory of that experience, I remember once we slowly started to get into the numbers, I think I had made a comment like, why are you like, in a kind way, I was like, why don't you just look at our notice of assessment? Why don't you look at this like pile of papers that the accountant prepared? All the information's there. And I remember you pushed back on me kindly, and you were like, no, I need to know you. I need to know your story. I need to know your story behind the numbers. And that's going to teach me so much more than this pile of papers will. And we walked through every line on the P&L, on the balance sheet in that way. And I'll never forget that moment, because you really dissected line for line what every line on the profit and loss statement meant on the balance sheet, and helped me understand and articulate it in ways that I wasn't able to before. And fast forwarding a little bit, that was such a teachable moment. And you don't know this, but you're my mentor, and I tell everyone that you're my mentor, by the way. But But that moment was really powerful for me because it unlocked this level of financial understanding and literacy that I didn't have previously. And, you know, the interesting ending of that story, and the beginning of our relationship rather, was that you came back to me with a term sheet and you said, look, here's a term sheet. This can really help your business. But with how we prepared and went through all of your financials, I think you have a better shot at getting better rates with your home bank. And if you can go back to them, you know, and speak to them the way we have, you know, dissected what your numbers really mean and the goals you're trying to achieve, I think you'll get better rates. And I remember that moment thinking like, aren't you in the business of taking my business? And you just sent me back to my home bank. And you were right. Like you were totally right. I went back to, at the time it was TD. Overnight, I went from a $0 line of credit to a $50,000 line of credit. From that, at the time it grew to a $10,000 credit card limit. I was able to grow to a $25,000 credit card limit. And this was literally because of your support. And you taught me how to speak like a bank, like to a bank advisor, to a bank advisor, like a bank advisor, so that they could advocate for me properly to their underwriters as well, which is another thing I didn't even know was a thing. Like, what's an underwriter? Like, I just assumed the person I was talking to at the bank was the person making all the decisions. Turns out, no, obviously that's not the case. So I didn't even end up being a client of BDC out of the gate. And I think like that's such like one of my favorite things about our stories, that you really did have my best interest for the business at heart.
I think I remember that clearly because I think I put you in touch with definitely back to TD, but also EDC at the time. I think I brought them in as well because you were looking at a lot of international expansion, and it just made sense. I do recall that, and it's interesting, but you'll find just kind of what. I think it's the way most bankers are wired, actually. They do want to help. It's just we speak a different language, and it's really hard. It's almost like, well, I'm in Ottawa, so talking to government folks, right? There's a different acronym for everything. There's a different language, and it can really cause a barrier if you don't have literacy in that language. And it's not a statement on your intelligence or your ability to run a business. It really, truly is just a new language that you should learn, become a little bit more familiar with. So that was a lot of fun. And I think that when you have a long-term approach to a business and growing it, and I know you do with your focus on sustainability, being a B Corp, your goals were very much aligned with the way I like to do banking as well, and the way BDC likes to approach things. So yeah, it was great. I knew eventually we would do something together.
And I think maybe less than 2 years later, we ended up becoming a BDC client, and we have been ever since. And BDC has really transformed the way we're able to do business, from, you know, not only helping us relaunch what we've created with the world's first fully biodegradable and refillable tea collection. That wouldn't have happened without BDC's support with that, to even now, you know, we're in the process of discussing supply chain, you know, loan crisis and having some relief from that. So let's kind of walk back a little bit for some of the viewers here. When you're first meeting a potential client, you know, you're meeting them for the first time, what's important to you? Like, what would you say is the best way that they can prepare for you ahead of that meeting to kind of make the most of it? And what are you looking for in your conversation with them?
So basically, it is a getting to know you. It's more like a needs discovery type meeting, if I could position it that way. So really just understanding what you're trying to achieve and what you think is getting in your way. When I walk through a door, I know nothing about your business. You know 100% about your business. So it's really, you should be doing most of the talking and telling me about it. Sometimes if you have financial information, I will ask for that in advance so that I can understand what's possible. And then I can kind of direct some of the questions based on what I'm seeing from the numbers. But mostly, it's not a numbers discussion until, I think you discovered, until later on in the discussion, where then we start talking about what's possible and then what might be the best approach. Because I think a lot of times, especially with banking, you don't know what you don't know. in the beginning. You don't know what's possible. You don't know what questions to ask or where to prepare. So I think just having that open initial conversation and kind of assessing where you're at and where you want to be at, and then mutually both of us sort of developing the plan to get there, not just, you know, relying on the bank to come back, but really interacting through that. You were always great in sort of feeding back on what was working, what wasn't working. I always, I think I told you this, I attributed your feedback as key to, you know, I always feed your comments back and up the chain for what we're doing in supply chain right now. So thank you.
I remember sending that email frantically, like a solid 12, 15 months ago, whatever it was, in the height of the supply chain crisis with, you know, Tees was beat down every angle you can imagine, from rising freight costs to rising product costs to, you know, products being delayed, you know, 60, 90, 120 days. And the more of the products are delayed, the more the receivables to get paid for those products are delayed. And I'm, you know, accumulating so much, you know, interest and challenges in the process of it all. So I remember frantically emailing BDC and I think also EDC. And I said, hey, like, I know I'm not the only founder impacted by this. Every business must be like, what are you doing about it? What are the resources? What's out there? And I think that's a really good reminder to, like what you said, for everyone listening here, you don't know what you don't know. Even if, you know, you're working at an established bank for, how long have you been at BDC now? 20, 25 years?
Oh, feels that way, but just over 10 years. Prior
10 years.
to, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
My background's kind of diverse, but I was at Scotia prior to
that's
Scotia
right.
prior
Yeah.
to BBC.
And
Yeah.
it's important that I think that, you know, entrepreneurs are very vocal about their feedback, right? Because again, like you said, we all don't know what we don't know. And if we can share what we're experiencing in the trenches in the moment, sometimes that can help influence some of the support and relief programs that might exist after the fact. So thank you for always listening to my rants, feedback sometimes. So let's kind of go into the various types of funding. Now, obviously, you know, representing BDC, you represent, you know, really like the banking side of things with, you know, loans and line of credits and that sort of thing. But if you want to jump in and share anything about the other types that we'll kind of quickly highlight, that would be wonderful. So talking about so we're going to talk about a couple different types of funding here. So self-funding, grants and awards, friends and family funding, and then VC funding. And finally, bank financing. So when we talk about, you know, self-funding, to me anyway, that just basically means like really having your own skin in the game. So investing your own personal money, which my personal opinion is that's actually critical. And I didn't realize how critical that was until one of our conversations as well, because I can't remember what meeting it was, but you were going through my financials and you had made a comment like, it's so important to see your skin in the game as an entrepreneur, because the amount that you're willing to put in or have put in can potentially influence how much the bank is willing to lend you as well. Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I was trying to think of where this conversation would go. But I do think that self-funding or making sure you're prepared to put in your own investment, it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of bankers will start using jargon on you like debt to equity, or you need so much in equity for us to provide the debt. But skin in the game essentially means to me that that you're not just going to walk away, that you're seriously invested into this, that you have something to lose, just like the bank would have something to lose. So it's really a shared risk scenario. So sort of being prepared to understand that you should be putting money in up front. And then I know that you had kind of, when we reached out and we were talking about talking about this, you know, self-funding on its own, I think can make sense, because a lot of times it's really your least expensive form of borrowing. But I would caution you that if you start self-funding and you start bootstrapping, you start maxing out all of your credit facilities on the personal side, you really have to keep in mind that later, if you approach the bank, it can become more difficult to get financing because your credit scoring will have gone down because you've increased your utilization. if you can maintain on-time payments, but still increasing your utilization can really impact your credit score. So self-funding is important, but I think it's important as part of an overall plan.
Definitely. Yeah. And so how would you approach, like, how would you caution founders to handle that balance then, that amount of self-funding versus, leaning on a bank or other methods of financing their business?
I guess I would caution on two fronts. First one is so I'm a banker. I would encourage you to talk to a banker, your banker, as early as possible in the process. Once you have that business plan done and you feel like you've got some, or maybe you're already selling and you've got something viable, but early on in the process, have that conversation, because I think that your chances of having a higher credit rating at that point in time are going to be really, really good. And then I guess really understanding that cash is king. So having access to capital and understanding what your cash flow requirements will be out for the year, not just starting and feeding more money into the machine from self-funding, but really understanding where you need money. If you can do it all yourself, it's probably going to be cheapest, but in most cases, entrepreneurs can't. And so the timing of when you approach your bank early on in the process, getting set up with an overdraft facility or line of credit can make a lot of sense and can really take down your stress level throughout the year. You may not utilize it, but most likely you will have to. So it's good to get it set up early on. Yeah.
No, that's great advice. And before we go into the next form of funding, listening to the panel before us, I don't know if you were listening to that, but there was a lot of this money mindset talk, right, about some of our own limiting blockers that really prevent us from taking control of our finances in the first place. And so you reminded me of a really good point. So one thing that I shared with one of the panelists that was speaking previously is I was the first person in my family to actually graduate high school, let alone go to college. I was a terrible student. I did grade 9 math, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And obviously that Pythagorean theorem really worked out well in knowing that through school. But anyhow, what advice would you give a founder like me that is very anxious around finances? I'm not as much as I used to be, of course, thanks to your support and mentorship and me being very diligent about trying to understand the world of finance to my best capacity. But what would you say is like the good first steps of making finance approachable and like starting to build up those financial literacy skills?
So, and it's funny you mention it, when I worked at Scotiabank, actually, and it's one of the reasons why I came over to BDC, but I used to always use the BDC online portal. And there are some courses on that where it'll just get you familiar with the language. There's some videos on, what your banker looks for. So you can at least understand the language and understand what that might mean, just to kind of educate yourself a little bit. And then your team of professionals will help you. Your accountant, your banker should be walking you through some of this information as well. But in the beginning, I would suggest, try and educate yourself a bit. I also know that CPA, they run some great financial literacy courses as well. And it's just great to participate. I know BDC, we used to run one through helping women entrepreneurs. And it can just be a great thing. Talk to your peers and really kind of demystify that whole process for yourself, because is it scary, Sheena, now that you know a bit more about it? Is it empowering?
It's just so empowering and so liberating. It's an incredibly liberating, empowering feeling, to say the least, to know that I not only know what's going on operationally with every angle of my business, of course, because I've built it with the team, but then on the financial side, understanding again, what every line means and represents my business and how I can make decisions related to my business because of those numbers and feel good about them. There's nothing more empowering than that, for sure.
Right.
And you made a good point. One of my regrets early on was not holding my accountant accountable to saying, tell me, what does this mean? Tell me, what does that mean? It was like, because in the early first few years of Tease, you know, they would just say, okay, give me this report, give me that report. And like, I'll file year end and, you know, we'll call it a day. And that was it. But in retrospect, like I was paying them for a service. I should have ensured that that service, you know, included understanding every item. So if I had like a do-over, and for anyone listening here, if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, don't be afraid to hold your bookkeeper or your accountant accountable to explaining the why behind everything. And I think I was worried about looking not intelligent by asking them, and I would act all confident, be like, okay, this looks good. But I really did myself a disservice by not saying, okay, but what does this mean? What does that mean? Why is this balance that on the balance sheet, right? And so I think like that's an excellent place to start gaining more of that empowerment around your books, for sure.
For sure. I think you need to look at it the way you communicate with your health professional. And I used to always say a lot of people have that white coat syndrome when it comes to their banker, because they feel that, you know, you're going in and you're asking someone to finance you, but then you're also showing your soft underbelly. Like, I'm really not sure about the, you know, these few things. So going out and empowering yourself and educating yourself and asking your professionals really what does that mean and what does it mean to me, can be really empowering. And some people will engage business coaches to help with that as well. And that can be a very valuable investment. I think you will kind of want to get your feet underneath you and start generating revenue and start seeing kind of what your margins are and how things are going. But then once you're in business for a little bit, you know, having a coach coming in to really help build your skill set can be valuable.
Definitely. And I know here at Tease for our next chapter, we're excited to bring on a fractional CFO to really like have that dedicated, you know, thought leadership and guidance more frequently. So yeah, it's good. It's good stages of growth all around. And so going into the next type of funding, let's talk about grants and awards. So this is an arena that Tease actually does have quite a bit of experience with it on many levels. Number one, through Founders Fund, we raise and distribute funding in non-repayable micro grants to women founders across Canada and the United States. So we've built some programming around grants, but Tease has also been a recipient of grants in the past. And one thing I will share for everyone listening, there's so much money out there when it comes to grants. The thing about grants is that I like to say it's kind of like shopping at Winners or Marshalls. It's like it's like you got to really dig through and find like the right one that's right for you. And then is it worth your time to like dig through, you know, the piles and piles of clothes to find something that's like the right fit for you or your business metaphorically, because there are so many options out there and grants can be very time consuming. So for anyone who doesn't know what a grant is, it's essentially non-repayable funding for your business. That's really what it is. You don't pay it back. There's no equity. And there's a lot of, nonprofit organizations and even some for-profit that do offer grant type of support. The government also has incredible grant support for businesses as well. And essentially, you know, you apply for these grants and they can take a bit of time. You hope for the best that, you know, whoever's received it and looking at the criteria that it meets their criteria. And then they'll usually, you know, issue the grant, perhaps there are some terms behind it. But, you know, my biggest piece of advice with grants is to make sure, again, like this goes back to speaking the language of your audience, make sure you're speaking their language and, you know, what their objectives are. So if it's for expansion and exporting into the US, we just recently did a CanExport grant. And, you know, candidly, I'll share, we received $29,000, which is not nothing. Like that's amazing, but that's the government's investment in wanting us to, when I say us, I mean entrepreneurs in general, to expand in new markets, right? And that definitely took a bit of time for our team to dig through, to actually fill it out to the requirements that were needed. But now we know that we have this financial support to do trade shows in the US. And so that's essentially what grant funding is. Every time you answer a question on a grant form, in my experience, make sure you literally answer the question verbatim in the answer, because that, I know it sounds so obvious, but that's you know, a lot of these, you know, organizations get tons of applications, and the easiest way for them to weed through them is to make sure that the top of the list actually qualify. And the best way to qualify is to literally check every box as you're going through them. So I'll pause there. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to grants, or if you have experience in the grant arena, Catherine.
Well, yeah, I do. Being a sort of a Crown corporation, we get asked a lot about grants, and typically we don't.
Oh, I don't know if you froze or if I froze. Can someone let me know in the chat box?
I think
Oh.
Catherine's still frozen.
Okay. Maybe when she comes back on, Amanda, you did the Can Export grant. What were some of your takeaways?
Program that,
Back.
okay.
Catherine, you froze for a little bit, so you might have to rewind a bit. Oh, I think we're having some tech issues. That's okay. Continue, Amanda. We'll get
Come back. Yeah, I was just saying in the chat box that the grants are so finicky, and Sheena, that was a really great tip about reiterating the question and the answer. They can be very, I want to say, inaccessible sometimes, government grants and things like that. Very specific about wording. That's a big part of the reason why Sheena started Founders Fund, actually, so that we can make funding more accessible and offer more support as you go through the funding process. But yes, definitely there are still good grants out there that will be a total pain in the ass to apply for, but you should still apply for them, because a lot of times these grants don't go to anybody because nobody applies. I'll hand it back
Can
to
you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I figured I got the big hook there. I just wanted to say, I said on their website, if you go to their website, you can drill down on grants, but you'll get just a ton. So you can filter on what you're looking for. What I find, that really resonated with me is what Sheena said on, it can take a lot of time. So if you talk to your peer network, talk to, again, professionals on the grants that they find are successful. So Can Export, we have great success with a lot of our clients with Can Export. So I recommend people to them all day long. There's also a couple of their strong ones right now. The Canadian Digital Adoption is quite easy to apply for, and is giving out money if it matches what your needs are. So it's important also to make sure you map it. But if you feel, another great source is the Ontario Small Business Enterprise Centers that you can reach out to. And sometimes you can actually talk to a live person who can then give you guidance on, based on what your needs are, these are the best grants for your buck. And then finally, I'd say that if you don't have the time and the bandwidth to apply, because these things can be a lot of effort, that what you might want to do is employ a company that does grant writing, because getting 75% of something versus 100% of nothing will be better for you. So the one I come across a lot is MentorWorks, but there are a lot of grant writing programs out there that you can tap into, maybe in the early stages when you're focusing on your business. To do that can really save you a lot of time and still kind of get your toe dipped into the grant writing waters.
Yeah, and to your point, like in 2019, Tees was a recipient of the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy loan. Not loan grant, sorry. And that was like a full-time job in itself, filling out, like that was truly one of the most difficult grants that I had ever written. And so I remember with that experience, and I had to call in a lot of help to complete it, because I was like, I am getting this grant. It's not an option to not get it. And if I'm going to put in so much effort, I'm going to get so many eyes on my application, make sure, it crosses all the T's, dots the I's. But then to your point, when we learned about Can Export recently, we're like, we're not writing this. Like after like how intense it was to write the previous one, we did exactly that. We hired a grant consultant that worked with Amanda. They worked together to complete our Can Export loan. And I know Amanda still had a bit of work to do to fill this out for us at Tees and cross the finish line. But this guy was an expert in writing grants. He knew exactly how to speak the language. He knew exactly what they were looking for. This writer came as a referral from another recipient of Can Export grant who was successful. So I knew that they had a good track record, and it was like a similar, share model. They, I can't remember exactly, it was 20-25% was their cut. But to your point, that's better than zero, because you don't actually finish the application, or because you missed some random box that you didn't get right. You got weeded out of the pile, right? So yeah, it's about really, making sure you're putting your energy, time, and resources in the right place, for sure. All right, so that's grants. And also, if anyone, I know Ali or Amanda, if either of you on this call want to share, I think you shared Can Export. Okay, they already are. They're already ahead of it, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. That's
And
amazing.
The one thing I forgot to mention is if you're outside of the urban area and more rural areas, the CFDCs, Community Futures Development Corporations, they're great folks to talk to and can help guide you in grants as well. Like we lean very heavily on a lot of our partners. So
amazing.
That's all. Yeah.
And the last resource too, the Innovation Canada funding portal, I think it's called. Anyway, all you have to do is, it's kind of like a type form. You fill out a couple facts about your business, and it curates and spits out specific tailored recommendations for grants and capital for your business, just based on a couple of questions that you answer. And that one's a really, really cool, usable portal as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about friends and family funding. This is a fun one, because Brandy was chatting in the previous session about how her now husband, but her then boyfriend, gave her a loan to support her business, and it caused some friction, and it might have potentially been the end of their relationship, but everything worked out and it's all good. But I share that story again because, like, that's how tricky family and friends funding can be, right? Like, it's a very personal decision to make, and there's a lot of personal emotion that can go into that. So Catherine, do you have any thoughts around friends and family money, lending?
Well, I do from a banking perspective. I'll give you how dry is that? So basically, a lot of times, small businesses, when they're starting out, we call it love money. If you can get some love money from your parents, or love money from somebody, and you don't, they don't need it back right away, or maybe they're gifting it to you, that's an absolutely wonderful way to start your business. And if it's something that's gifted to you, if they can provide you a gift letter, then the banks will count that as equity. So
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, because it is. There's no repayment attached to it. If it isn't love money and there's set repayment, then it's either going to be considered debt or equity, depending on what you're giving them in return for it. And then in that case, because it's a business transaction, I would say you would want to very clearly document what the repayment terms are, what the expectations are. And very similar to VC, when you're giving out equity in your company, you just want to make sure that it's very clear who's kind of going to be making the decisions for the company and what the goals and objectives are, so that you're not caught in a situation where the expectations are different on both sides.
That's okay. So my takeaways from that, which were so key, because I didn't follow any of that when I got a little bit of love money early on in my business, which I wish I did. Number one, get a letter confirming the amount just as the document, because that is so incredible that can be counted as equity or skin in the game for your business, right? Which we talked about, which is so important. That didn't even occur to me until this moment. That's amazing. The second thing is, regardless, document, have very clear terms. If there's repayment, if there's non-repayment, is there a small interest associated with it, whatever that is, repayment schedule, definitely have everything documented. So there's no blurred lines, and then you can kind of navigate some of those emotional complexities that can come with friends and family financing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Like you said.
I was making sure I recapped it right, because those were some really good gems. Okay, so VC funding. Well, let's talk about angel funding versus VC funding, because those are two different things, and I know that they often get used interchangeably. And I call myself like a bit of a novice in the angel arena. I've invested in a couple early stage women-owned brands that I love, and I'm very passionate about, like their roadmap and everything that they stand for. So I have a very limited personal experience on the angel investing side, and essentially angel investing is basically, if you're an angel, you're contributing an amount of money, an agreed upon amount of money as a private investor, essentially, into the business of the business that you're investing in. And there'll be various there'll be various terms about what that investment looks like. But in terms of the amount, I think some people are surprised like at what the amount can be. Like you can be an angel investor from like 5,000 up to like 100,000 plus, whatever. It's not necessary. You don't have to be super wealthy or have a lot of extra disposable cash to get involved as an angel investor. But an angel investor is usually kind of similar to friends and family raise. It's like people that you're kind of loosely connected to that you can bring in formally, again, as an angel into your business. And I don't know, I don't want to add too much more to that because I don't want to like add too much complexity to it, but do you want to add anything to that, Catherine?
Not really. On the angel side, though, and it's similar on the VC side as well, in that, you know, you can invest directly, or you can invest like into, or you can pool into a fund that, so you can invest a smaller amount and share the risk across multiple folks. So, yeah.
And then for venture capital is essentially like a larger portfolio of like shared, you know, allocation of money, essentially. So when you're VC funded, you're usually backed by like a firm or like a, you know, a collective of people or businesses that are investing into your business. Would that be like the easiest way you would describe it in most simplified terms versus angel versus VC?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it sounds good to me. I'm not a specialist on angel or on VC funding. I used to go to the Angel Network though, and that's always really interesting to hear the pitches from the companies. And I think for sort of this conversation, like, I mean, if you're looking at VC financing, really you're looking at probably your most expensive at the end of the day form of access to capital. But if you have a really, really steep growth trajectory, like, so VC, they say they invest in hockey stick type growth, right? So you, an early stage hockey stick type growth. So it's a riskier type of investment, a lot more on the due diligence side. But when you get the capital, you get access to a lot of capital. So it can be a very, very good thing to help you grow. And I know, like, I mean, again, if you go to bdc.ca, you can look into sort of some of the strategies around getting VC investment, but you really do need to have a high growth company. You are giving up equity. And sometimes if you can hang on and finance through debt until a little bit later, your valuation of your company can be higher and you can get more from the VCs. So a lot of people kind of see this timeline continuum, like early stage, we're going to go VC, and then you eventually evolve into debt. And I would argue that you might want to look at a debt piece first, and then build your company and the worth of your company before you go to VC, because I think then you might have a higher valuation and access to even more money.
Yeah, I so agree with that. And that's that exact path is the path that we've, you know, decided on at Tease a while ago, that is important to leverage, you know, debt financing well before we ever entertain the idea of bringing on investors of any sort, because during that time, you also have a lot of time to like refine what it is you're selling, where you're selling, how you're selling, and like really focus on that growth and making it a repeatable, scalable business, which to your point, I think also adds to, you know, the potential valuation down the road for investment like that. Because yeah, you don't want to be one of those, you know, horror stories where you're VC funded or something like that, and you get this influx of cash, but you don't have a lot of track record or receipts as a business. And then, you know, you're using up all that money and like you're aimlessly shooting darts at a dartboard and hoping something sticks, because there's not that track record like leading up to it, right? And maybe getting undervalued in the process. And then also the complexity of answering to investors too. I think you relinquish a lot of you can relinquish some decision-making control in that process too.
You can, like, I mean, there's pros and cons, and I'd say you'd really have to weigh this because um, the purpose for a lot of times for a VC investor is the exit, right? So they're going to push you to meet certain KPIs, and then they're going to want to exit the lending. So they're really pushing for the growth. Whereas you might have another objective for your company. So Sheena, for yourself, like, I mean, wanting to have that sustainability piece and the environmental piece. And if you had to sort of fight with somebody else who was just looking at bottom line and or looking at your growth and looking at, you know, driving that growth, where does the environmental piece that you value so much fit into that? So yeah, just give it a lot of thought.
And in your opinion, because you have so many clients at BDC, of course, so you probably have, you know, entrepreneurs asking you this frequently, like, hey, Catherine, like, I know I'm a client at BDC. Do you think I'm ready for investment? Like, should I explore that path? Like, what are you looking at? Like, how do you approach that conversation if you're asked that?
If they have a high growth trajectory or they're in a target industry that makes a lot of sense, then we will facilitate introductions into our VC group. And we do that. We try and recognize those companies right away. We also have kind of in between debt financing and venture capital. There's also, I'd call it quasi equity kind of investment or mezzanine investment, where we'll invest into a company and we'll structure it where it looks a little bit like an equity investment, but it's a little less expensive than the VC financing. And it really is term debt just with specialized repayments. So yeah, you can kind of, I think you need to have the conversation with your bank to decide which path, as well as your accountant. And I should add, like, I mean, with VC investment and equity investment, sometimes you can get some really smart money, smart investment, where they're going to come in and they're going to really round out your advisory team too and help you grow. So, I mean, there's definite pros. Yeah.
Excellent point, actually, that we should really zero in on for another minute too. Like, if someone out there is looking to bring on an angel investor or, you know, navigate the world of VC funding, you're absolutely right. It's like, what more can they bring to the table outside of money? Because if they're just adding money, you really got to look at the cost benefit analysis of that. Is it, you know, should you just maybe try and take on more traditional financing from a bank, for example? And yes, there's interest, and yes, all that, but at least you're not losing any control of your business because said person with money doesn't really have a lot of experience to help you get to the next level, right? They're just a wallet that is opened up for you. So I think like that's a really, really good takeaway. One of my personal stories with that exact situation is about 2 years ago. We were on Dragon's Den, as you know, super cringeworthy moment for me, but a lot of fun looking back on it in retrospect. And we were one of the businesses, sorry, that got a deal. And I knew going into it that not a lot of businesses like actually end up going through with the deal and due diligence, and it's a TV show at the end of the day and whatever. And I technically gave up half my company on national TV, but I use the air quotes because like, I was like, this is probably not really going to go through. And you know what, even if this person is interested in actually being an investor in my company, I'll negotiate them lower. We'll do something that's reasonable, because in no world would I give up 50% of my company for $300,000. Like, that's just wild. But so I was really surprised when this person kept actually texting and calling me after and saying, come to Montreal, sign the papers, like, let's get the deal done. Like, I'm ready to take half your company. And I was like, whoa. Okay, hold on. Like, just kidding. Like, I thought it was a TV show. Joke's on me. Like, you're actually serious. And yeah, and I had to really do my due diligence in that moment. And I had that moment where, first of all, it's just, I'm not going to give up half the company. That's wild. Let's try and talk it back a bit. And at the same time, I tried to understand what value this person could bring to the business. What contacts did they have? What was their network? What was their retail distribution power? You know, how are they going to help elevate my business? And it became very clear that we're in two very different industries on two very different pages. Our values were not aligned, which is something very important to me. probably more than the other things I shared. And also they were relentless. They were like, we want 50% and that's it. And I said, okay, well, it was really nice meeting you. Thank you for the great opportunity to be a part of the show. And we'll have to cross paths because this doesn't feel good. And I don't really know what kind of value my business will benefit from this long term. So yeah, just a long-winded story to share with everyone out there. Just make sure you really do your due diligence when you are entertaining the prospect of having investors.
I think that's a great point.
Anything else you want to add to VCs or angels before we go into the last part?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in VC. I just know enough to recognize and refer into the experts. So I apologize that I just don't have.
No. That was supposed to be me. Like that was all me. And I always try to like tread lightly on the conversations of angels and VCs because like that could be like a whole other webinar for another day. And I just wanted to kind of touch on it high level and the consideration. So thank you for helping me do that because your perspective is valuable with all the different types of entrepreneurs you interact with. So bank financing. Okay. So I'm going to let you pretty much own part of this. Like, so what does it even mean, Catherine? I know it's pretty obvious, but what is bank financing? How do you summarize bank financing?
I think bank financing is extremely important for you to have a day-to-day bank for absolutely every entrepreneur. And I guess bank financing, I would put it into 3 buckets, maybe 4, but bank, your cash management. So when you go to the bank, how they help you with your transactional work. And your bank account. Then you're looking at your cash flow management, so overdraft facilities, and then sort of term lending where they'll lend to specific assets. So I guess that's bank financing in a nutshell. And then I would think sort of outside of financing, helping you make the most of your money if you're not investing it back into your company, but then working with you on investments. Sorry, there we go. Okay. So I think that in a nutshell, typically when people think about bank financing, they think of term lending, which is where you receive the money up front and then you repay it over a specific term. And those terms vary depending on the type of term lending you're doing. So if you're doing unsecured lending, you could usually repay those over about 6 years. If you're doing, and those are the most expensive. Pardon me?
What does unsecured lending mean for those watching?
I use that term to mean like you'll still probably sign a personal guarantee for it, but there's no hard asset backing it. So it's not secured against, it's not secured against real estate. It's not secured against equipment.
Okay, got it. Amazing. So the next question we have here is, how do you know when you're ready to look for a bank partner? In my opinion, yesterday. It's like, if you don't have a bank partner today, get one yesterday, or there's no better time than today, obviously, because that was my biggest regret. I waited way too long to develop a banking relationship because by the time I was, again, 3, 4, 5 years into business and like banging on my bank's door, like demanding for help, they didn't know who I was. Like, I was just this like cute little tea company, like way up, just on this, like, I really do regret not opening up that conversation, that relationship earlier. The only thing I did was get that $1,000 credit card limit. And fun fact about that credit card, I had to pay $1,000 in trust, like in security, to get the credit card limit. Like, that's just how much of a file I didn't have. So I've really I've come a long, long way. But yeah, I really should have started that yesterday. What is your opinion on that?
Same. I think that's one of the first things that you should, talk to your bank, even if it's where you do your day-to-day personal banking. Go in, start establishing a relationship on the business side. Let sort of that company get to know your company. Let that person get to know you, because they can provide a lot of advice. And a lot of times, and this goes back to when I was at Scotiabank, but an early stage company, especially, if you have your business plan, go in, because you haven't proven yet that you're going to make tons of money. but you haven't proven yet that you're going to fail. So you're kind of a blank slate, and there are startup programs at most banks. As long as you have a strong credit history, they can get you started on your day-to-day. They can get you started with your visa. They can get you started maybe with a small line of credit. And then I would just encourage you that after every year, once you're done your reporting and you can proof out some successes, go back and talk to them. Like when Sheena and I first met, I told her to go back to TD. I think you actually have a compelling story to increase that limit. And don't be discouraged, because you're a different company when you've been in business 1 year than when you've been in business 2 years. Most banks will view you as a startup until the 2-year mark. But then once you've proven that you can kind of get over that hump, it becomes an even more compelling story for them to invest further, because you've survived. Okay.
Yeah, well, we talk about you make some great points. We talk about using debt as a tool. I don't know what else to call this, but like practicing good debt hygiene, which I'm so guilty of not doing long ago as well. But for those who think that they have like the not greatest credit score, or like me, avoided taking on credit cards and all that stuff, so you don't have a track record to show that you are lendable, basically take out that credit card now. Even if it's like a $300 card, you would be so surprised how fast you can not only increase that limit from paying your $10 Netflix charge every month on the same card and keeping the utilization down. Like I remember, I think this is so embarrassing, but I'm going to admit it. I think only 5 or 6 years ago, my credit score was like a 635, a 640, and Catherine would know because she's done the credit check. She's seen it all. Talking about looking at under the soft underbelly, you've seen like the good, the bad, the ugly over here. And then I think just a week ago, we were talking about the supply chain debt, and you're asking me, or the supply chain debt relief loan, and you're asking me some qualifier questions, all that stuff. And I cut you off halfway through, you're explaining something. And I said, oh, by the way, I have the best news. I'm like 2 points shy of having an excellent score. And I wanted to share that with you. And you were just so celebratory of that win for me, because you've seen it all. And I remember even a couple of years ago, you had checked my credit file and you said, hey, I know you're a busy lady, but you can't forget to make payments on your credit card. You forgot to make one payment, and I can see that, and put that on automated, get that automated so that you don't even have to think about it. And I was like, I know, Catherine, you're right. I know better. I should do better, kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's just another piece of advice I do want to share with everyone. Make sure you're practicing that good debt hygiene. It's really not hard. You can start small, and, within a couple months or a couple years, you can get a massive trajectory difference, not just for your business, but for actual credit score, and therefore your lendability.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to jump in, because sort of that, I once, very early on in my career, I had, I think it was a senior VP say to me, banking should be boring. It should be going on in the background. This sort of stuff it's boring. You should just get it automated, get it off of your radar, because it's not going to help you do business if you think about it all the time, but it sure is going to prevent you from being able to do things if you don't take the right steps. And the same thing, being a conservative person, being a banker, being fairly debt adverse myself, I do think from the previous presentation, you have to spend money to make money. Why not spend someone else's money? Why not spread that risk and to talk to your bank and see if they can participate with you, share the risk a little bit. But then again, practice good hygiene with respect to that. So really plan out your year, forecast what your needs are going to be, and then borrow to make sure you can borrow, and through your cash flow naturally generated from your sales, you can, I think, sleep at night a little bit easier, knowing that you have the proper credit facilities and you're properly capitalized. So I think it is, even though it sounds risky, it is a more conservative approach. So it looks like we're going to get the hook.
Well, one other quick thing, because I think it is valuable, because the question here is also, where should you start with banks? For finding the right bank. If it's not your home bank for whatever reason, and ideally it should be, as Catherine and I talked about, one amazing resource I will call out and shout out is Futurepreneur Canada. What I loved about my experience with Futurepreneur is they make and like, loans for your business, pretty accessible and straightforward in terms of their process. But also it's a good intro gateway to BDC, because what I learned going through the Futurepreneur process, one of my first loans with BDC was actually because I was a Futurepreneur client. And so that automatically opens up two partnership pathways through Futurepreneur and BDC. So I do want to call that out as well as an awesome resource.
So you touched on a question actually that we had in the chat box. That's why I hopped on. So Adele is asking, should you start your business banking with the same one that manages your personal banking, or is it better to diversify your banking?
That's a good question. Catherine, what's your take on that?
I personally would stick with who I have a good relationship with and knows me personally, because I think I would get more traction there. If I find that they're not receptive, then I might search elsewhere. But a lot of times across the banks, I've run into great folks at every single FI and the credit union. So to be honest, I would think maybe you might want to consider, though, if you're going to go international, to check out the bank's international relationships, because, for example, Scotia has a lot in Latin America. TD has a big presence in the US. RBC has tons of connections international. HSBC, you're looking at if you have supply chain coming from China. So depending on your business operations, that might dictate where you choose. But I think when you're very first starting out, your home bank is a great place to start.
That's great. All right. Thank you so much, Catherine and Sheena. That was such a great session. I love your dynamics together. I love your history together too. It's just so good. Thank you so much for joining us. And we've got one more session today. Before we get into that session, I also just want to share something interesting that I recently learned about credit and finance. So I'm in France right now working remotely, hence why it looks like it's night here, because it is for me. And I was talking to a Parisian about credit and credit scores, and they were so confused. It's not a thing here, like mortgages and stuff, yes, but like going out for a coffee and putting coffee on your credit card, or buying a TV or whatever you need with a credit card is so not a thing. And I was explaining it all to this French person, and they were like, that sounds like a trick. I don't understand. And it was just very interesting when we talk about money mindset and the cultural differences that play into money mindset, because I can't imagine being a French immigrant to Canada and then having to get a credit score and having to learn that credit system. So just something that I thought was interesting. All right, so we're on to our last final session of the day. I'm so excited. We're here with Shannon Peston and Shauna Frederick, founders of the Finance Cafe. The Finance Cafe provides education initiatives that inspire, educate, and encourage women to take control of their business finances and empower women to reach their full potential as entrepreneurs. I think you can see why we've invited them to be here today. They're just so on our wavelength. Recognized for creating innovative funding models and solutions that challenge the status quo, Shannon is a trusted voice on women's entrepreneurship for educators, government, industry, and media. She was the first woman in the country to lead a women's banking strategy and one of 7 women appointed to serve on Canada's Women Entrepreneurship Expert Panel. Welcome, Shannon. And Shauna is an entrepreneur, family enterprise advisor, and skilled CPA. She spent close to 10 years with the Famous Five Foundation and chaired the foundation for 5 years. Through that experience, she has had the opportunity to learn from women entrepreneurs, oversee committees across Canada, work with external partners and government officials, and co-lead the creation and deliveries of a girls leadership program, a 5-week program that builds leadership skills in girls. Oh my God, I'm so excited to have you both here today. This is going to be a really interesting conversation, because for anybody that has been sitting with us through the last 2 hours, this next session is a little bit of the first session, a little bit of the second session. We're going to be talking a lot about money mindset, emotions when it comes to money, and cultural programs when it comes to money. But we are also going to be talking about some nitty-gritty takeaways that you can apply on your finance journey. So welcome. So excited for this conversation. Did I do your bios justice? Because you guys, I feel like I could be reading from a textbook and it would be 4 hours later and I'd still be listing off accomplishments and incredible things that you've contributed to. So is there anything that you would like to add or anything about Finance Cafe that you'd like to add?
No, that was amazing. Thank you so much for the really thoughtful introduction. And I had the pleasure of sitting in on part of the last conversation, and I love all the questions that were coming in because this is just such a dynamic topic that impacts us very differently as people, but personally and as entrepreneurs. So yeah, we're looking super forward to the conversation, and thank you for having us.
All right.
Sure. And sorry, Amanda, can I just say I'm grateful for everyone who's sticking in there. I know you've been here for 2 hours, but hopefully Shannon and I can share some input on the money mindset and you can learn more about the Finance Cafe. So Amanda, thanks for having us, and thanks for everyone for sticking here for another hour.
Oh, this is going to be juicy. If people are getting like a little bit restless, they're not going to want to walk away from this now, especially with this first question, because we're going to go straight back to the beginning of your lives. And we're going to ask you about what kind of conversations were happening around money and finances when you were growing up. Please share as much information as you feel comfortable with, but I know that all of our different family dynamics, structures, cultural upbringing impacts this. So I would love to know what you saw as a little kid about money. Shauna, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks. It's a great question and it's a tough question. I'm an accountant by trade. I talk to entrepreneurs about their money all the time, but for me, it's difficult. And I'm learning how to share my own story. And Shannon's really helped with that journey for me. So I'm grateful, not only for her partnership, but for pushing me along this journey. So for me, I grew up in the country without a lot of money, but I had a very resourceful mom. So I learned a lot of my first lessons about money from her. We didn't talk about money a lot. There was conversations around, no, we can't afford that. But if we really needed something, she was resourceful enough in that she would find a way to do it. So I remember key tidbits, standing in line at the grocery store, watching her balance her checkbook, right? Learning how to reconcile money. On the odd occasion that my grandma would take us to the store, she would give us a quarter to spend on candy. So we would have to budget the amount of money that we could spend. And then later on, mom taking me to, and we just heard about it in the last session, getting my first credit card, the importance of building that credit from a young age. And so it was really important for my mom to relay these messages to us, and not necessarily sitting us down and talking about it, but by example, really. So from the time I was 14, I had a job. I don't think I've been without a job since I was 14. So it was really important that I was able to earn and rely on myself for my own funds to ensure that I could get through that. So those are just some key lessons that I learned.
And did you ever notice like a power dynamic with money, or was there a way that your family talked about people with or without money?
No, and my biological father left my mom and 3 daughters when so all of us were under 8. So it was my mom handling the money and the finances. And so it wasn't until I had a boyfriend later in life who managed my money that I realized, wait a second. And there's some other stories that we'll share along our conversation today, but it is very interesting. Yeah, for me, I was able to see my mom handling the finances and then getting out and even working with different entrepreneurs, especially when you're working with couples, watching the dynamic play out as the money conversation comes.
We talked about that on the money mindset panel that we started today with as well, romantic relationships and how, it can be great for money. It can be not great with money. Yeah. And it's a really interesting dynamic to see play out for sure, especially if you're a woman or woman identified person. That power dynamic is very different. Shannon.
Well, hi everyone again. And yeah, for me, our family, we didn't talk about money. And it's, when you kind of think back on this, like we just never had conversations. I never knew what my parents' financial goals were. I never knew what was sitting in the household. All I knew is that we were we were a family of small business owners, and we had a family business. And that family business sort of really defined how I saw money, because there was ups and downs, and you could tell if we were having a good year by how many presents were under the Christmas tree that year. And some year there was nothing, and other years it felt like we were doing okay. So I guess I just learned to feel money. Money was sort of an energy that I would feel in our home, and you could tell when things were tense or when things were good. And so, you know, as I was growing up, I mean, I left home really young as well. I was 16 when I decided that I wanted to leave home, because I thought I knew everything at that time. And, you know, when I left home, I didn't have a bloody clue about how to manage finances. In fact, you know, speaking of relationships, I had a really bad boyfriend who would often get me to do fraud, and I didn't even know I was doing fraud, but I'd write checks. He would say he was going to deposit money into my account, and I would write checks because I had checks. And then before I knew it, I was being called into the RBC bank office, and the bank manager said to me, he's like, you know, you're committing fraud. And at this time I was 17 years old, and I didn't even know what that word was, but I remember just being so scared out of my mind, because I was always very much a rule player, even though I was kind of bad and didn't want to live at home. So I kind of always learned my financial lessons the hard way. But you know, I think for me, because we didn't talk about money, I didn't ever really develop a relationship with it. And so, you know, I think for myself growing up, I would make mistakes, and I would always just learn from those mistakes. But I also think too that, you know, I came because we were a family that had a small business, and maybe some of you can relate to this too, but you know, it was sort of like the self-made man kind of idea. Like my dad was the head of our household. It was very important to him that we, like, the sake of appearances, that we had everything. It was keeping up with the Joneses. And I could always feel that struggle. So wealthy people were something that I think we aspired to be, or at least to look like. And we weren't always that, but I do remember always, you know, it was more my dad's mindset that was being pushed on to us. So very personal experiences for all of us. And I think you kind of said it best. Like there's so much that shapes that relationship that we have with money, and our identities, and how we grow up, our education levels, our backgrounds, how new we are to Canada, how young we are, our gender, our religious backgrounds. There's all these different pieces that fit into this, how we see and experience and feel money.
Yeah, and how those money foundations are built, especially I think when you get into the entrepreneurship space, you really start to see those patterns amplified for better or for worse. So I think that it's entrepreneurship in so many ways, not just money, but it is such a good way to get to know yourself. But you can learn some really painful lessons that maybe you could have learned a little bit earlier if you had been aware of what your programming and foundation was around money. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing all about that. And so the next question, building off of that, when did you start to make your own financial choices, and how did that responsibility make you feel? I know you both mentioned that you were on your own quite early. Me as well. I was actually 13 when I became financially responsible for myself. So I remember I actually felt very safe in my own financial control. I made a lot of mistakes, but it made me feel like I had some control over my world. I'm really curious to know when you two started making your own financial decisions, and really how it felt on emotions, on a spiritual level. Shannon, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Shauna, my mom managed the day-to-day household finances. So while my dad managed like the investment side of our family household, it was my mom that really ran the operational budget. And we do know that women just generally are the multiplier buyers, right? They tend to buy for the families, and I know you're talking about credit cards. I just want to say this before I forget, but you know, because we are the multiplier buyers in our family, that actually can impact our credit rating when it goes to get a personal or a business loan, because depending on when you're getting a credit check pulled on you, if you have really high spending on your account that month, that actually impacts you. But that's a whole other side note. But you know, I guess for me, like I always had an allowance, right? So we had to do chores. We learned very young that there was an exchange. Like if you did this, we would get paid for it. And then again, being in the family business, we would get paid for doing work in the summers and in the weekends. But I would say that I felt responsible really when I went off on my own, because like you mentioned the word safety, that was the time that I knew the only person that was going to be able to protect me was me. And so I had no choice. I was 100% in survival mode at that time. So every financial decision that I had to make, I had to be very thoughtful about it. And again, like I said, I learned a few really tough lessons along the line, but I always sort of had that more of, I would say a fear mindset at that time. Like, so when I talk about how did it feel, as much as I felt safe, it was fear driven because I didn't have a lot of money. I was working 2 retail jobs that were barely covering my rent. I often will say that I could still afford to buy cigarettes at that time because smoking was a really important thing. I'd forgo food over smoking cigarettes. But, there was just sort of this notion that everything was fear-based. Everything could be taken away. I was living at the poverty line. I was living in a crappy little apartment. And so for me, it just became really important not to overextend because I had nothing else to lose. That was kind of the state that I was in.
And Shannon, can I ask how you felt about your place in the world, or how you thought that other people were perceiving you? Like if they saw your apartment or your jobs or anything like that, did you start to build a different identity of yourself because of your financial situation? And if so, what did that look like?
I don't think I was ever conscious of that. Like, in fact, if anything, I was actually proud of my little apartment. Like, it wasn't much, but it was mine, and it still provided me a very safe place to go to. And so, I never, like, unlike growing up where it was more about appearances, this was the first, it didn't matter. This didn't matter. Like, I was in survival mode 100%. And when you're living in survival mode, you don't really care so much about what artwork is on your walls or I was just really happy that I didn't have to move back home and I could actually afford to be on my own.
And do you think that experience of being self-sufficient and having pride in providing for yourself set the stage for where your career would go and where Finance Cafe would eventually come out of?
Yeah, I mean, everything is a collection of our past experience, right? And so, for me, the Finance Cafe wasn't born out of this experience, but my experience led me to a different career path where ultimately I would become a business lender and stand up the first banking strategy for women. And so I think it gave me a very an empathetic place to start from and to start being very curious about the problem. And the more women that I worked with, the more that I could see there were a lot like me that didn't understand how the finances in their business were putting the picture of the company that it was, or they didn't know how to unlock personal finances if they had to inject money into the company. And so for me, my experience growing up, if anything, it made me understand the gaps, the knowledge gap, and and I will say that, and I hate always making it sound like it's women's problem when I say we have a confidence gap and a capabilities gap, but we can take a look at the numbers about how we as women report on our levels of confidence and capability when it comes to the financial management of our company. So it just made me very aware that I had these own gaps in myself. I was solving them through banking. And then it was like, okay, well, now how do we make a bigger, more meaningful impact on the conversations that we were having? And that's where the Finance Cafe and Shauna comes into my worldview here.
I love that. Shauna, so we'll take it back a couple steps to my original question. When did you start to make your own financial choices, and how did that feel for you?
Yeah, similar to Shannon. I mean, like I said, I've worked since I was 14, and for the first, probably 4 years, I was living with a partner who was handling all the finances. So it wasn't until, like Shannon, I moved out on my own, and I was fortunate enough. I was in Calgary at the time. I had an aunt, and she took me garage sailing, and I furnished my entire first apartment for $80. Including a brand new microwave from a wonderful little lady who told me that all she did was heat up her coffee in it. And I remember feeling so proud because I got my own apartment. I fully furnished it. I had all of what I thought I had what I needed to survive. And I was working 2 or 3 jobs. But it wasn't a very safe apartment for sure. I remember, and I joked about it then, I joke about it now. I was bartending and I would come home at 3 o'clock in the morning and I would have to walk through the hallway, and there was usually my neighbor passed out on the floor because him and his spouse would get in a fight and he would go and sleep in the hallway. And I slept with a hammer for a year and a half. So it was making my own financial decisions. I felt, I mean, I didn't feel unsafe, but I knew it wasn't the safest place for me to be. But I was confident, and I was making the right choices to do what I needed to do to move forward with my life, for sure. So that's sort of where it all started.
I think it's really interesting that all three of us found a lot of power in having the reins of our own financial, I don't know, financial worlds, if you want to say that. That's really interesting because obviously historically, in a lot of cultures, but North American culture, there's like the housewife that doesn't actually get to control any of the finances. And even now, if you're not a housewife, sometimes you still don't get to control finances. And I think that it's really interesting when you look at women that are put in scenarios where they have to take financial responsibility, that from our own stories, it actually feels like safety. It actually feels like some freedom versus a burden to manage financials. I thought that was really interesting. And so this is
yeah, sorry, Amanda, I want to touch on that because you said, the housewife, and I essentially played a housewife from the time I was about 15 until 18. And I remember taking, because I would do grocery shopping in between going to high school. Like, it was ridiculous. But I remember my partner would come home and be like, well, what did you spend that money on at the grocery store? Like, I bought food. So it was, and so, in hindsight, it absolutely played a role in how I live my life and how I move forward now. But I didn't think about it then. It was, it was just conversations that would be had. And when I was able to move out on my own, it was, okay, well, I'm going to buy this. And like Shannon, so we both were smokers in a young age, but for me, I could afford to buy beer. And I remember one of my good mentors, still to this day, I would complain about the price of fruit and vegetables. And she would joke with me and say, well, I bet you have enough money for beer, Shauna. So it comes back to, I think, priorities and the lessons that we learn, what's important to us, and whether it's, bad habits or even, other things. It's all, as long as we can take the learnings. Another mentor of mine says, I'm happy to pay the tuition as long as I take the education. So make those mistakes and learn from them and move forward.
I love that. I love that line about I'm happy to take the tuition so long as I get the education. I love that. So this feeds into our next question. For both of you, were you always aware that there was a gap in financial knowledge and power between men and women? When is the first time that you felt this personally? When is the first time that you realized that it was more than just yourself that was feeling it? Shauna, let's start with you.
Well, and I was able to catch the tail end of the last conversation, or maybe it was even the start of this. You were talking about credit and how people in France aren't aware of how credit works. For me, I think one of the starting points, I was in university and a friend of mine said, oh, I have to go put money on my credit card so I can go out tonight. And I knew that she had just recently put money on her credit card. I said, what do you mean? You already put money on it? I said, did you already max it out? She says, no, I have to keep putting money on it to use it. She was not aware of how credit cards worked, so that, you had to pay it off, but you didn't have to put money on it to use it. So I think that was maybe the first point. And then working in the accounting world and meeting with different entrepreneurs, the conversations between that I would have with men versus women, it started to really educate me on the different conversations that I needed to have. And then most recently, my very good girlfriend here in the city, her and her husband broke up. She had 3 kids. She was leaving him. And, so we started into planning mode, and I started having conversations with her about household budgets and finances. And she didn't have a clue. And it was sad for me because I thought, okay, I should have done better. I should have been talking to her about it. Not that it was in any way my responsibility, but it was, I think, an eye opener for me that not everybody knows this, and we really need to start changing that conversation, because it's not, as Shannon said, it's not the woman's fault. We need to be creating safe spaces for women to ask questions, to not feel put down, to be sitting across the table from advisors who are speaking to them about, answering their questions. And if they're not able to explain it, they have to explain it differently, because it's up to the advisor to educate them, so that to ensure that they understand what we're delivering, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the more that we have these conversations, the less that women will be in a situation where they don't know things that would give them power and freedom and choices. Because like you're saying, your friend, like, this is in 2022, I'm willing to bet that your friend is an intelligent, capable woman. And I think that there's a lot of intelligent, capable women that just don't know where to find this information, don't know that they're missing this information, and haven't been in communities like this where this is even a conversation.
Yeah.
Like it's
she's I'm just going to shout out to her. She's an airplane mechanic. She is a brilliant woman.
Okay, so she's not just intelligent, she's like brilliant. I actually think it's really important to point that out, because there's not an intelligence gap. That's not what's happening here at all. But I've had friends in very similar situations too, and it's really heartbreaking to see. And also it's infuriating sometimes when you're like, shit, what are we collectively doing wrong that we're giving up all of this power and resources to make choices for our lives, for the future generations' lives. So thank you for sharing that. Shannon, on to you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being often told not to talk about, like, you don't ask how much somebody paid for something. Like, it was really taboo to say, oh, how much did you pay for that? Particularly around things like houses and cars that were like in the male's domain or in the man's domain, I will say. But yet, this is the crazy thing about when I was in business banking. It's where it would become really obvious for me was watching how men would come and talk to me as a banker versus how women would come in. Men were always overstating their projections. They're always like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And they had no plan. Like, this was the crazy thing, is that they actually had no plan for all these things that they were going to do. But somehow if they said they were going to sell $1 million, it was believable. Whereas a woman would often come in and have the plan, know exactly how she was going to get her sales, but underestimated those sales, was always acting super conservative in it. It showed up for me in things like how women would price their products and not really running a profitable business at the end of the day because their cost structures were totally wrong. Or women having to feel like they needed to discount their value in some way, particularly around service-based industries. So that's where, when I think about like the knowledge, it's not just a knowledge and a capability gap, but this is where it starts to materialize in the system. Right. So if we're sitting across from a banker, and I was listening to the conversations about angel investors, like, profit is not always the #1 motivator as to why we go into our businesses. But yet the financial system, the lenders, the angel investors, the venture capitalists, that is a very big measurement of a successful business. And so for me, what I was seeing is, like, we have to empower women. We have to give them that language so that they feel confident going into meet the financial advisors, whatever that looks like. Because this is where it shows up, is it shows up in our abilities to grow what I will call a healthy, profitable company.
Yeah. And, I just want to bring up something that Jace Meyer from our first session did, because I just keep on thinking about it. And I think it's really relevant to what we're saying about conversation about money, and even like the way that we were raised. Jace said that she actually put I can't remember how old her daughter is. I think she's about 6. She actually put her daughter on the mortgage somehow, like a little thing that said that her daughter had contribute $6.75 to their mortgage, and that she had ownership in this house and she was investing in the equity of this house, and it was going to be this big thing. And she was explaining all the steps to her, and she had her sign her name, and she was really getting her really heavily involved in complete, like, transparent family financials. And I feel like that little girl is going to grow up with a very different mindset and awareness of money, just because she's kind of getting that hood popped and seeing what's under there. And I think that that's the type of generation that I think that we'll see. Do you feel, this is not a question that was written down, by the way, but I'm really curious leading off of all this. Do you feel like the next generation of women are becoming more aware? Do you ever talk to very young entrepreneurs in their late teens or early 20s, or even like kids that seem to be more aware of finances and how they work and how to play with them and not be afraid of them?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that a couple of things are happening. So first of all, like the education system, how we're teaching young girls about money sooner, that we're not taking them off the track of things like science and math and engineering and career types that have to deal with numbers, and because numbers actually lead to the whole money challenge as well. So I would like to think that the socialization about this is changing at a younger level. And I think as more young girls, we also have more women in the workforce than ever before. So there's more role models that we're seeing, more entrepreneurs, and we can take a look at, like, women are a fast growing segment of entrepreneurs. And so when we take a look at the growth of that, I'm hopeful that the next generation absolutely will. I love that example of a young girl having some ownership in the house, because and hopefully the parents are rewarding her to say your $6.75 is now worth this if the market goes up by 10%. So she's benefiting from the investment as well. But it's, so there's, I think at a younger age we're starting, but I'm also hoping that we'll see more support from the financial community to start changing the way they talk to women about finance. But also we think about the gender pay gap as an example. This is a key way that the workforce certainly influences entrepreneurship, but women are already making less money than male counterparts. So that means less money to be able to invest in our business, less savings down the road, less money to invest. So that wealth gap continues to get bigger. So we have to be able to address some of the systemic pieces and some of the conversations and start building more gender intelligent products and services so that we close that gap. And the reality is, you'll often hear me say that the financial system in Canada was never built with women in mind. And now we see the problems and the consequences of a system that didn't consider what women's economic roles would be.
Can you dive a little bit into what gender intelligent systems would be?
Well,
because that's the first time I've heard that, and I'm like so curious.
Well, gender intelligent would be recognizing the unique circumstances that men, like, so taking a look at how biology influences financial decisions. I mean, this is kind of the crazy, but I'll repeat something that I heard at a conference, and God help me, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but this woman was talking about even menstrual cycles, that there are certain points in time in our cycles where we should not be making major decisions because our hormones are actually so just even like, not that that's going to go into the banking system, but these are different types of questions that different types of circumstances that we need to be considering. Things like women's roles in the family. So if you think you're an entrepreneur of entrepreneurship, women still have a lot of family dynamics at play. So if we don't start thinking about, how does this influence the way a woman's business might look on paper? Or how do we address the credit? So maybe a lot of women don't have the same high credit scores. In fact, we know that women have lower credit scores than men because we can take a look at what Credit Counseling Canada would say. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we buy for the household. No fault of our own, right? I mean, if we're buying for the household and this is the way the system is set up, then what we need is the financial system to recognize those gender nuances to say, okay, but how is this purchasing behavior shaping credit? Or again, gender intelligent being like, women don't have the same amount of wealth to be able to invest, or to recognize that women aren't necessarily risk averse, like a lot of the research would say, or how men would interpret women to be in the financial system. We're actually very risk aware. It takes us longer to come to the decision that we want because we have different factors to consider. So when I talk about gender intelligent, it's understanding the uniqueness, the biology, the psychology that influence the way men and women behave when it comes to money, because there's a lot more, women have a lot more, I'm going to say, consideration sets to consider in a financial journey.
That's really interesting. Wow. There's a lot there. I want to talk about perception that women are more risk adverse. But I also want to point out for our community too, we know that this conversation sounds very binary because we're talking about women a lot, but Shannon actually touched on something very interesting, whether or not you are a person with a uterus and have a menstrual cycle that is impacting some financial situations, and whether you present and live life as a woman that is impacting your social responsibilities and family dynamic. So it just seems like the whole spectrum of what is encompassed by women and women's biology is really not great for anybody. So that's interesting. That was interesting to me that you brought up the biology and also the societal stuff. I would love to jump into the risk now, because I think that my perception has always been, oh, women are more risk adverse. I feel like I am more risk adverse when it comes to finances. You're telling me it's not true, and I would love for it to not be true. Tell me a little bit more behind that.
Okay, well, let's flip the narrative. Let's just flip this picture for 1 second. Let's say if the financial system, so we know that women's businesses, like we know that there's lower default rates with women's lending. Okay, let's just take this as an example for a second in the financial system. And so the way that banks look at risk is usually like by a 5C model of what they call, and I'm not going to get into that here, but I would argue that when we take a look at the sustainable factors of women's businesses, I would argue that men might actually be too risk tolerant. You know, like there's a lot more risk that is sitting in the way that men are building their businesses. Whereas if we looked at the way that women's businesses are contributing to the family, to communities, to society, and to the economy, you know, we're showing that we're prepared to take risk. It's just we think about it in a more holistic framework. So if the banking system were created today based on the type of businesses that we would see, I would think that women are actually a very strong, like a risk-taking population. We're not risk crazy. Like maybe it's the other way around, and we've just come to say that, oh, well, women are risk averse. I mean, I don't know. I just kind of think about like flipping it on its head. Like,
yeah, I think that's really interesting because for two reasons. My whole career is in social impact, and the strongest, most impactful, and most profitable leaders in social impact are women. And then also talking to again, Jace Meyer. Jace is always talking about the ecosystem of everything and how it all impacts. And women tend to look at the ecosystem versus like the quick buck. It's kind of like the marshmallow experiment, if anybody's aware of that. If you give a kid like one marshmallow and you're like, you can eat this now, or you can wait 2 minutes and I'll give you 2 marshmallows. You know, the kids that like eat it immediately, they tend to be boys, and they tend to be less future thinking. So it's just like interesting things to think about. Shauna, where do you sit when you look at risk, and what have you experienced with like clients and everything? Like, what have you seen?
I just want to go back to the financially gendered intelligence system, because Shannon's absolutely right with respect to our financial institutions, but as advisors, especially as accountants, we need to approach the conversations differently with women entrepreneurs compared to male entrepreneurs. So for me personally, I've had the experience where men will come to you, male entrepreneurs will come to you, here's how much money I want to make. This is like top line. This is what we're doing. Whereas women start with here's their passion, here's their purpose. They want to build that relationship and that trust. And if you push them into the money conversation right away or too quickly, it gets uncomfortable, they get flustered, they tend to shut down. And why wouldn't they? It's not a conversation that can be comfortable. I'm not saying for all women, but for many women entrepreneurs. So as advisors, we really need to change the narrative and change that conversation and approach it in a way, let the other person drive that conversation. Feel them out. And you can tell, any advisor can tell when you're having that financial conversation, if there's that blank look, I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing my job correctly if that individual sitting across the table from me doesn't understand what I'm saying. It is my role, as I've said, to educate. So I just wanted to make sure that for any of the advisors out there, it is so important that we take this into consideration as we're working with clients.
That's
You know,
really
can I just
interesting.
hop on to
Yeah.
what Shauna said? Because you know what, Shauna, I just love that you said that this is about the advisors taking this to you, because let's take again, if our primary motivation for business is not profit led, there could be a bigger purpose to like, what is the motivation for why we're going into business? If the financial advisors, be it bankers, be it accountants, be it business coaches, whatever, start with profit first. You're going to see a natural tendency for us to say, whoa, but that's not what's most important to me. And then by default, we're perceived as being like, we don't understand the business. We don't understand how it's going to make money. We seem risk averse. We get judgment placed upon us because we're not talking the profit language. And so again, this is where the system piece really comes in and hurts women-led businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because our last session, it was with Sheena, founder of Founders Fund and Tees, and her BDC rep, Catherine. And we asked Catherine what her first impression of Sheena was like, her first meeting with Sheena. This was 5 years ago, and Sheena had like chased down banks to try to get some kind of financing. It was really early stages and really difficult for her. And Catherine said, well, I showed up at the office. Sheena invited me in. She gave me a tea. She started telling me about the tea and why she started the company. And that is just so bang on with what you just said, Shauna, that like good advisors or advisors that are really going to move the needle on the women-led economy are ones that don't go straight to the bottom line immediately. So that's really interesting to see.
Love it. So that you asked me another question and now I don't remember what it was.
Because this is so good. This could go a million different directions. The question was about women being risk adverse or not risk adverse. How do you feel? What have you seen with clients? How are you with risk and financial management? Yeah, tell us everything.
There's one example that I always think about, a very impactful, successful businesswoman that I worked with in Calgary, who has since passed away, but and this isn't a great term, but she had she was afraid of losing it all, and it was actually classified as bag lady syndrome. So she was successful, she had all the money in the bank, she had all the assets, she was running a successful business, but she thought at any point in time it could all be just torn away from her. So she lived her life in significant fear and sadly died far too young. But I have seen that fear, and I see it in myself, quite honestly, where it's that fear of, one mistake and everything, it's a house of cards. And is that from, it's like Shannon, I'm a strong believer in everything happens for a reason and everything in our life builds this up. But it's trying to understand, okay, so why is that? And how can we, again, as advisors, maybe have some conversation and unravel that and see if there's some steps that we can take to ease that fear and to help understand, okay, because you can show all of the cash flow projections as accountants that we want, but there's still that notion of, this could all be gone. So, and living, if we have that notion in our personal lives, we are going to take that into our businesses. And so that interconnectedness, and Shannon and I talk about this a lot at the Finance Cafe in our program, we need to understand our personal money mindset, because we take that into our businesses. And if it's fear of risk, we may not seek out loans. We may not, increase our prices when we should. We might have, difficult time having conversations with customers to collect on accounts receivable to get money in the bank. So it's just it is an understanding and an awareness and being able to have those conversations as advisors.
Yeah, and if I can too, risk is measured against what we know to be true. And this is where the education piece is so important. So when we think about even financial literacy, which we hate that term, and if someone's got a better term for us, please let us know. But financial literacy is that combination of just the knowledge, our skills, the awareness that we have on things, our lived experience around it, but ultimately what this is going to culminate into is our financial behaviors. So it's going to shape things like how we earn money, how we save money, how we spend money, invest it, protect it, borrow it, give it, plan for it. And so risk it's going to be different at different points and times in our lives, but we are comfortable taking the risk when we understand what's at risk, right? And the mitigation around this, and whether it's, our managing our personal finances or our business finances, it's what is the risk and how am I going to mitigate it? Because there's risk in absolutely everything, and there's absolutely risk when it comes to running a business too. So when we understand how we feel about earning, or how we feel about borrowing, how we feel about different financial behaviors and things that we have to make decisions on in the business, we feel a lot more confident in the risks that we're about to take.
And
Knowledge is power.
yeah, for sure. And we're talking a lot about, how we feel about risk, how we feel about this, how we feel about that. What are some resources or ways that you've seen people in the Finance Cafe community develop a stronger, healthier, more abundant money mindset? Because I will literally talk to my therapist about this stuff. That's how important I think it is and how deep I think it is. But I'm really curious to hear what you guys have seen as well.
I think it starts in some of our cohorts. We've seen this, where it's a 7-week cohort, and night one, there's a bit of hesitancy to speak up and to share stories. And as the weeks progress, again, that trust and that knowledge that they're building throughout the cohort, they feel more comfortable and confident in order to have those conversations, because they know, first of all, that it's a judgment-free zone. If they have a question, they can ask it. So Shannon and I are strong believers. It's this building of community, capability, and connection, right? So it's being able to have that circle, that network that you can build that, because again, as Shannon said, it's that knowledge. So if we're continuously teaching, educating, and learning from each other, I think that's where a lot of it can come from.
In that community, do you ever meet people that don't want financial abundance or are repelling it because they believe there might be some kind of morality attached to having money or some kind of moral standard?
I would say no on the whole, because once someone is committed to a financial, like to understanding the financial literacy, they've kind of let go of that. But what I would say is that we still challenge the money narratives in the program. So when we go back to these behaviors, we say, well, where does the evidence come from to support that behavior? So where is this rooted in? And so, some people, and I'll maybe just use an Indigenous cohort, and myself, I am Indigenous too. And so I'm gonna speak more freely in here with my own lived experience as well. But in Indigenous communities, wealth has not been abundant. In fact, there's many ways that the system has not supported Indigenous people at all economically. And that's, I'm trying to put that as gently as I can. So, so for some of the Indigenous women in one of our cohorts, it was like, well, making money it feels very against what I've been taught, or what I've been taught to think that I deserve. Or money is not individual, it's for the community. So it's how they view the purpose of money. And I would also say a lot of newcomers that we work with as well, or anybody that's racialized, right? Because it has been a system of oppression. And so anytime you're running into that kind of a system, there's different money blocks, there's different narratives that are being told about what we deserve as human beings, our intelligence levels that should support some of the earnings behaviors or those conversations, or what, how, certain things lead to wealth and other things don't. So I would say by the time people come into our program, it's like, I want to understand how to do this differently. I want a more meaningful connection with my business. I want to understand how I'm making decisions. And so I don't think that we have that to overcome, but the entrepreneurs in their own journey, this will come up over and over again about where do these feelings come from, and like, where's most importantly, more than the feelings even, is actually the behaviors. Because once we understand the behaviors, we can go back to how the thoughts, feelings, and attitudes are actually going to shape those. So it's this individual journey that entrepreneurs go through, and there's no one person that's the same. That's the other thing. One person might be hung up on something, somebody else might be hung up on another. Some people might say things like debt is bad. And I was listening to Catherine talking about this as well. Like, why wouldn't you want to use someone else's money? Well, that might not be true for somebody who's family went into bankruptcy and had an awful experience losing everything because they had credit. And then suddenly they couldn't pay that credit and their house got taken away. So that person would have a very different money narrative. And so again, it goes back to the financial behaviors and those decisions we have to make inside the companies. That's where we have to understand how our thoughts, feelings, lived experience all come together to shape the decisions that we're going to make and the behaviors that we're going to act upon in the business.
Yeah, it's so nuanced. It's so personal. It's such a big topic. And that's why it makes sense that you have a 7-week program that you take people through. I'd actually love to know a little bit more about that structure, because it does sound very therapeutic as you describe it as well.
Well, we'd hope that we hope that it's healing, right? Because there's a lot of trauma around money. And I know there's a whole program on the trauma of money. And we don't focus so much on the trauma of money as we do to understand how our money mindset and our lived experience shapes the decisions that we're going to make. And then ultimately the program is more about how to run a profitable, healthy business and giving entrepreneurs. And we've done this we're very gender focused in our programming. We have taken all of the confidence and capabilities gaps. We've taken the areas where women are reporting to be less confident in the financial management of their companies. And we've really zeroed in on those. So things like, how to create a profitable company. Do I even know what makes up my profit in my company? So ours gets more into the technical, but the technical so that so women can have a better connection to their companies. They feel more connected to it. They feel more capable in it. And ultimately they've got a lot more confidence in how they decide to show up in their companies as the entrepreneur and as the leader.
I love that so much. And when did you decide to build this program together? Like, what was the start of, hey, this needs to be like a 7-week program. These are the things that we need to go into, because that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, maybe Shauna, you can, I don't.
Well, Shannon and I, we ended up in Canmore early on in the pandemic, and we had been advising together for a group out of Southern Alberta, and asked us if we would put together a financial literacy program for the women entrepreneurs in rural Alberta. And so Shannon and I ended up in Canmore one weekend, and we thought, oh, this will be, we'll just film some videos on your couch and talk about the balance sheet and profit and loss. And it quickly evolved, and we understood, we knew right away that there wasn't anything else out there that really focused on the money mindset and how our thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors personally, how we bring that into our business. So it was very important from the start that we really started there. Getting, learning ourselves as well. I mean, Shannon was much more versed in this than I was, but really understanding ourselves, what our money mindset was. I'm an accountant by trade, and Shannon has really pushed me to, again, provide this knowledge to entrepreneurs that don't have an accounting mind, that don't have the numbers background. Like I failed math in grade 12 and my first 3 years of university. So I'm not a math genius, but for accounting, it works for me somehow. It's just how my brain works. So it's being able to apply this knowledge. So it started in Canmore early on in the pandemic, and it has evolved, and we've got some audacious goals that we want to achieve through. We're starting an advisor stream next week. So it's giving the knowledge and the power to not only the entrepreneurs, but the advisors that support them.
That's incredible. And for anybody listening that's curious, this information will be sent out in our post-event email with also the financial literacy quiz that you guys have on your website. I thought that was pretty cool. So I'm including that in our email too, because it was kind of fun. That's interesting that you failed math as well, because I think a lot of the entrepreneurs we talk to are like, I failed math like a bunch of times, and like, I don't know if I can get this financial thing right, but you can. Failing math is no indication of your future financial stability or prowess. That's great. I would love to know from each of you, what is something that you used to think was true about finances for you that you've learned is like total bullshit? Shannon?
That you have to be good at math. I will say that, like, that is it. And I think we think that we have to do these massive, because nobody has explained it in simple terms. Like, the financial jargon itself is bullshit, quite frankly. We talk over each other's heads, and like, no wonder people don't want to engage with this conversation, but it's a story. It's a story that's told through numbers. But once you get the story, and once it becomes meaningful as a story, it changes entirely. I mean, I went into marketing because I was told that I was bad at numbers too. Starting when I was in grade 7, when a guidance counselor said, don't do anything with numbers. And I believed her that I totally believed that to be true. When I became a business banker, I'll be totally honest, I had no idea I didn't know how to read a financial statement. I was learning on the fly. But I think holy crap, if I could learn it, then anybody can learn it. And even in our program, like, you don't have to be an accountant or a banker. We're not trying to turn you into that. But what we are trying to do is give you the tools that you need as an entrepreneur to be able to assess, is your company profitable? Is it at risk of running out of cash? What are the early warning signs and the opportunities in front of you? And seeing this story come out of not just the financial health, but the performance of the company in a way that I think feels really unique, and it feels really connected. And so yeah, the biggest bunch of BS for me is that you have to be good at math. And I think if we just eliminate it's not about math. It's really not about, we can't explain that until you actually get into it. And you're like, this actually has nothing to do with math. So that's the biggest BS for me.
I thought it was really interesting on your website how you talk about finances as a story, and how it shows a story of your business and, even your life. And I think that makes sense with what you're saying completely, because it's not about like transactional numbers. It's actually, it builds to a really interesting, complex story.
What's crazy is, like, in banking, I used to be able to say to my clients, like, there's certain people you don't lie to your defense lawyer, to your doctor, to your priest, if you have one entry banker, because we're going to uncover it. Because in those financial statements, we can peel out the story of the business very quickly. We know exactly what has happened. It's very difficult to go around the banker to hide something, because it's very uncoverable. And again, this is where it comes down to the story. And if we can teach entrepreneurs the story, they will see how every decision that they have made in their companies has got it to where it is now, and how it will take them to where they want to go in the future. So I think it's really actually quite empowering.
I love that. It's almost it's almost like fortune telling in a way. Like you're able to kind of tell what's going to maybe happen in the future. I love that.
Amanda, sorry, you're absolutely right, because you can use the past. Your financial statements are a story of the past, and you can use that story to, project into the future. So it's not about, and so for many entrepreneurs, you get those year-end financial statements, put them in your bottom drawer and never look at them again. Look at them on a quarterly basis at the very least, and understand what's happening, because it will give you indication of your relationships with suppliers and customers. Are you paying them? Are they paying you? It will give you, the relationship that you have with taking on debt. Do you have enough debt do you have any debt in your company? And what's that feeling? So I know it's the story of the past, and absolutely you can fortune tell into the future to a degree.
I like it. You guys are like financial forensic scientists. Shauna, what's one bit of bullshit that you have learned about finances that you used to think was true?
I thought everybody knew financial statements, accounting, how to read financial statements. And so when I started off in my career, I was horrible at explaining what I was talking about. I was talking using acronyms that nobody understood. And worse off, probably, I didn't realize it for a long time. So you're having these conversations, and then slowly and gradually, especially as you start working with good mentors, you start to realize that, the information that you're telling them, it's not valuable to them. Like, what sort of value? And I remember walking out of a number of meetings, and my very good mentor, Chris Matthews, would say to me, what value did you just provide that client? Be like, oh, and I start rattling off all these things. She's like, no, that was valuable to you. What was valuable to them? It's like, ooh. So I think that's the biggest one for me. But then I would also flip that as well, in that you are not the only one that doesn't understand it. Because I've also heard from a lot of entrepreneurs, it's like, okay, I should know this because I'm an entrepreneur. Why should you know this? What has, the system done? What has society, like, why should you know this? It's not something that you're either born with it or not born with it. I mean, it's something as with anything. Do you know how to change a tire on your car or change the oil or fix an airplane? Like, I don't, but I know how to do this. So it's getting comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations and knowing that you're not the only one in the room with that same question.
You've identified something really important, is that there's a lot of shame when you don't know financials that you think that you should know because you're running a business, and maybe you're running a business that's going relatively smoothly and you still don't know what's up. There's a lot of shame. And for that reason, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't ask the questions that they need to.
You're 100% spot on. And I've had those conversations. And again, if you're sitting across the table from an advisor who's speaking down to you or who's not asking you questions, or, who you're not comfortable with, it might be time to change that relationship, because there are so many advisors out there who can help you understand and make you feel confident enough to ask that question. There should be absolutely zero shame in saying, you know what, I'm not really sure what this is telling me. Can you help me out?
That's great. I think that's a really good tip. But my last question for both of you is, what is the number one thing that you want people to leave with today? What's like your number one top tip? Shauna, that can be yours because you just gave a really number one, unless you have another one too, because like I know that you've got a lot of knowledge. But what's the number one thing that you want people to leave here today knowing?
For me, I guess it's never too late. Right? It's never too late to start that relationship, and like it's a journey for everyone, and people are going to be at different parts of that journey at different points in time. But I mean, it's the most complicated relationship we have is the one that we have with ourselves. But it was just really important to say, like, what is important to me in this life? What is important to me in this business? What do I want out of it? And quite frankly, like when we ask what is important to me, that I always say, follow your heart, the bottom line will follow, because it really does start there. But build that relationship. Don't be scared to learn, and embrace the journey, because it will be the most empowering journey that you could possibly be on.
I love that.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, of course.
No, you're cut off. Don't compare yourself to others. Comparison is the thief of joy. So, I mean, and especially in this world of social media, we all post the greatest of the great online. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So do not compare yourself with others. Have a look and understand your thoughts, your attitude, your beliefs, and move forward and focus on you. And that's all that matters.
That's incredible. What a great note to leave off on. Thank you so much, Shannon and Shauna. Great session. For everybody watching, we will have more information about the Finance Cafe coming up in our post-event email. So be looking out for that about an hour after the event. And that was our last session of today. I wanted to say, like, this has been such a great event. I think that we've just scratched the surface of how complex and nuanced and honestly how wonderful money can be. And I want to thank everybody that's come out here today to join us. Big thank you to our sponsors at BDC. You've seen them in a couple of sessions and how deeply knowledgeable and personable they are. So please reach out to them if you're looking for a banking partner. Also, remember to share what you've learned today on Instagram to be entered to win gift cards from EVO Beauty, Teas, and Bathorium. Tag BDC and Founders Fund, and we will choose our winners at random tomorrow. Also, a reminder to stay in touch to get news on all funding opportunities, grant opportunities that we find, as well as some resources and news from within our community. You can subscribe to the newsletter in the chat box. Allie's going to drop that in for us right now. And that is it. And that is all. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Until next time.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.